Chapter 16. Pierre, after all, had not managed to choose a career for himself in Petersburg, and had been expelled from there for riotous conduct and sent to Moscow. The story told about him at Count Rostov's was true. Pierre had taken part in tying a policeman to a bear. He had now been for some days in Moscow and was staying as usual at his father's house. Though he expected that the story of his escapade would be already known in Moscow and that the ladies about his father, who were never favorably disposed toward him, would have used it to turn the Count against him, he nevertheless on the day of his arrival went to his father's part of the house. Entering the drawing room, where the princesses spent most of their time, he greeted the ladies, two of whom were sitting at embroidery frames while a third read aloud. It was the eldest who was reading, the one who had met Anna Mikhailovna. The two younger ones were embroidering. Both were rosy and pretty, and they differed only in that one had a little mole on her lip which made her much prettier. Pierre was received as if he were a corpse or a leper. The eldest princess paused in her reading and silently stared at him with frightened eyes. The second assumed precisely the same expression, while the youngest, the one with the mole, who was of a cheerful and lively disposition, bent over her frame to hide a smile probably evoked by the amusing scene she foresaw. She drew her wool down through the canvas and, scarcely able to refrain from laughing, stooped as if trying to make out the pattern. "How do you do, cousin?" said Pierre. "You don't recognize me?" "I recognize you only too well, too well. How is the Count?" "Can I see him?" asked Pierre, awkwardly as usual, but unabashed. "The Count is suffering physically and mentally, and apparently you have done your best to increase his mental sufferings." "Can I see the Count?" Pierre again asked. "Chem. If you wish to kill him outright, you can see him. Olga, go and see whether Uncle's beef tea is ready, it is almost time," she added, giving Pierre to understand that they were busy making his father comfortable, while evidently he, Pierre, was only busy causing him annoyance. Olga went out. Pierre stood looking at the sisters, then he bowed and said, "Then I will go to my rooms. You will let me know when I can see him." And he left the room, followed by the low but ringing laughter of the sister with the mole. Next day Prince Vasily had arrived and settled in the Count's house. He sent for Pierre and said to him, "My dear fellow, if you are going to behave here as you did in Petersburg, you will end very badly. That is all I have to say to you. The Count is very, very ill, and you must not see him at all." Since then Pierre had not been disturbed and had spent the whole time in his rooms upstairs. When Boris appeared at his door, Pierre was pacing up and down his room, stopping occasionally at a corner to make menacing gestures at the wall, as if running a sword through an invisible foe, and glaring savagely over his spectacles, and then again resuming his walk, muttering indistinct words, shrugging his shoulders and gesticulating. "England is done for," said he, scowling and pointing his finger at someone unseen. "Mr. Pitt, as a traitor to the nation and to the rights of man, is sentenced to—" But before Pierre, who at that moment imagined himself to be Napoleon in person and to have just effected the dangerous crossing of the Straits of Dover and captured London, could pronounce Pitt's sentence, he saw a well-built and handsome young officer entering his room. Pierre paused. He had left Moscow when Boris was a boy of 14, and had quite forgotten him, but in his usual impulsive and hearty way he took Boris by the hand with a friendly smile. "Do you remember me?" asked Boris quietly with a pleasant smile. "I have come with my mother to see the Count, but it seems he is not well." "Yes, it seems he is ill. People are always disturbing him," answered Pierre, trying to remember who this young man was. Boris felt that Pierre did not recognize him but did not consider it necessary to introduce himself, and without experiencing the least embarrassment looked Pierre straight in the face. "Count Rostov asks you to come to dinner today," said he, after a considerable pause which made Pierre feel uncomfortable. "Ah, Count Rostov," exclaimed Pierre joyfully. "Then you are his son, Ilya? Only fancy, I didn't know you at first. Do you remember how we went to the Sparrow Hills with Madame Jacquot? It's such an age." "You are mistaken," said Boris deliberately, with a bold and slightly sarcastic smile. "I am Boris, son of Princess Anna Mikhailovna Drubetskaya. Rostov, the father, is Ilya, and his son is Nicholas. I never knew any Madame Jacquot." Pierre shook his head and arms as if attacked by mosquitoes or bees. "Oh dear, what am I thinking about? I've mixed everything up. One has so many relatives in Moscow. So you are Boris?" "Of course." "Well, now we know where we are. And what do you think of the Boulogne expedition? The English will come off badly, you know, if Napoleon gets across the Channel. I think the expedition is quite feasible. If only Villeneuve doesn't make a mess of things." Boris knew nothing about the Boulogne expedition. He did not read the papers, and it was the first time he had heard Villeneuve's name. "We here in Moscow are more occupied with dinner parties and scandal than with politics," said he in his quiet, ironical tone. "I know nothing about it and have not thought about it. Moscow is chiefly busy with gossip," he continued. "Just now they are talking about you and your father." Pierre smiled in his good-natured way, as if afraid for his companion's sake that the latter might say something he would afterwards regret. But Boris spoke distinctly, clearly, and dryly, looking straight into Pierre's eyes. "Moscow has nothing else to do but gossip," Boris went on. "Everybody is wondering to whom the Count will leave his fortune, though he may perhaps outlive us all, as I sincerely hope he will." "Yes, it is all very horrid," interrupted Pierre, "very horrid." Pierre was still afraid that this officer might inadvertently say something disconcerting to himself. "And it must seem to you," said Boris, flushing slightly, but not changing his tone or attitude, "it must seem to you that everyone is trying to get something out of the rich man?" "So it does," thought Pierre. "But I just wish to say, to avoid misunderstandings, that you are quite mistaken if you reckon me or my mother among such people. We are very poor, but for my own part, at any rate, for the very reason that your father is rich, I don't regard myself as a relation of his, and neither I nor my mother would ever ask or take anything from him." For a long time Pierre could not understand, but when he did, he jumped up from the sofa, seized Boris under the elbow in his quick, clumsy way, and, blushing far more than Boris, began to speak with a feeling of mingled shame and vexation. "Well, this is strange. Do you suppose who could think? I know very well." But Boris again interrupted him. "I am glad I have spoken out fully. Perhaps you did not like it." "You must excuse me," said he, putting Pierre at ease instead of being put at ease by him, "but I hope I have not offended you. I always make it a rule to speak out. Well, what answer am I to take? Will you come to dinner at the Rostovs?" And Boris, having apparently relieved himself of an onerous duty and extricated himself from an awkward situation and placed another in it, became quite pleasant again. "No, but I say," said Pierre, calming down, "you are a wonderful fellow. What you have just said is good, very good. Of course you don't know me. We have not met for such a long time, not since we were children. You might think that I understand. quite understand. I could not have done it myself, I should not have had the courage, but it's splendid. I am very glad to have made your acquaintance. It's queer, he added after a pause, that you should have suspected me. He began to laugh. Well, what of it? I hope we'll get better acquainted, and he pressed Boris' hand. Do you know, I have not once been in to see the Count. He has not sent for me. I am sorry for him as a man, but what can one do? And so you think Napoleon will manage to get an army across? Asked Boris with a smile. Pierre saw that Boris wished to change the subject, and being of the same mind, he began explaining the advantages and disadvantages of the Boulogne expedition. A footman came in to summon Boris. The princess was going. Pierre, in order to make Boris better acquaintance, promised to come to dinner, and warmly pressing his hand looked affectionately over his spectacles into Boris' eyes. After he had gone, Pierre continued pacing up and down the room for a long time, no longer piercing an imaginary foe with his imaginary sword, but smiling at the remembrance of that pleasant, intelligent, and resolute young man. As often happens in early youth, especially to one who leads a lonely life, he felt an unaccountable tenderness for this young man and made up his mind that they would be friends. Prince Vasily saw the princess off. She held a handkerchief to her eyes and her face was tearful. "It is dreadful, dreadful," she was saying, "but cost me what it may, I shall do my duty. I will come and spend the night. He must not be left like this. Every moment is precious. I can't think why his nieces put it off. Perhaps God will help me to find a way to prepare him. Adieu, Prince. May God support you." "Adieu, ma bonne," answered Prince Vasily, turning away from her. "Oh, he is in a dreadful state," said the mother to her son when they were in the carriage. "He hardly recognizes anybody. I don't understand. Mamma, what is his attitude to Pierre?" asked the son. "The will show that, my dear. Our fate also depends on it. But why do you expect that he will leave us anything? Ah, my dear. He is so rich, and we are so poor. Well, that is hardly a sufficient reason, Mamma." "Oh, heaven! How ill he is!" exclaimed the mother. Chapter 17. After Anna Mikhailovna had driven off with her son to visit Count Cyril Vladimirovich Bezukhov, Countess Rostova sat for a long time all alone, applying her handkerchief to her eyes. At last she rang. "What is the matter with you, my dear?" she said crossly to the maid who kept her waiting some minutes. "Don't you wish to serve me? Then I'll find you another place." The Countess was upset by her friend's sorrow and humiliating poverty, and was therefore out of sorts, a state of mind which with her always found expression in calling her maid my dear and speaking to her with exaggerated politeness. "I am very sorry," answered the maid. "Ask the Count to come to me." The Count came waddling in to see his wife with a rather guilty look as usual. "Well, little Countess, what a sauté of gay Mayu Madeira we are to have, my dear. I tasted it. The 1,000 rubles I paid for Tara's were not ill spent. He is worth it." He sat down by his wife, his elbows on his knees and his hands ruffling his grey hair. "What are your commands, little Countess?" "You see, my dear." "What's that mess?" she said, pointing to his waistcoat. "It's the sauté, most likely," she added with a smile. "Well, you see, Count, I want some money." Her face became sad. "Oh, little Countess," and the Count began bustling to get out his pocketbook. "I want a great deal, Count. I want 500 rubles, and taking out her cambric handkerchief she began wiping her husband's waistcoat. "Yes, immediately, immediately. Hey, who's there?" he called out in a tone only used by persons who are certain that those they call will rush to obey the summons. "Send Dmitri to me." Dmitri, a man of good family who had been brought up in the Count's house and now managed all his affairs, stepped softly into the room. "This is what I want, my dear fellow," said the Count to the deferential young man who had entered. "Bring me," he reflected a moment, "yes, bring me 700 rubles, yes. But mind, don't bring me such tattered and dirty notes as last time, but nice clean ones for the Countess." "Yes, Dmitri, clean ones, please," said the Countess, sighing deeply. "When would you like them, Your Excellency?" asked Dmitri. "Allow me to inform you. But, don't be uneasy," he added, noticing that the Count was beginning to breathe heavily and quickly, which was always a sign of approaching anger. "I was forgetting. Do you wish it brought at once?" "Yes, yes, just so. Bring it. Give it to the Countess. What a treasure that Dmitri is," added the Count with a smile when the young man had departed. "There is never any impossible with him. That's a thing I hate. Everything is possible." "Ah, money, Count, money. How much sorrow it causes in the world," said the Countess. "But I am in great need of this sum. You, my little Countess, are a notorious spendthrift," said the Count, and having kissed his wife's hand he went back to his study. When Anna Mikhailovna returned from Count Bezukhov's, the money, all in clean notes, was lying ready under a handkerchief on the Countess' little table, and Anna Mikhailovna noticed that something was agitating her. "Well, my dear?" asked the Countess. "Oh, what a terrible state he is in. One would not know him, he is so ill. I was only there a few moments and hardly said a word." "Annette, for heaven's sake don't refuse me," the Countess began, with a blush that looked very strange on her thin, dignified, elderly face, and she took the money from under the handkerchief. Anna Mikhailovna instantly guessed her intention and stooped to be ready to embrace the Countess at the appropriate moment. "This is for Boris from me, for his outfit." Anna Mikhailovna was already embracing her and weeping. The Countess wept too. They wept because they were friends, and because they were kind-hearted, and because they, friends from childhood, had to think about such a base thing as money, and because their youth was over. But those tears were pleasant to them both. Chapter 18. Countess Rostova, with her daughters and a large number of guests, was already seated in the drawing-room. The Count took the gentlemen into his study and showed them his choice collection of Turkish pipes. From time to time he went out to ask, "Hasn't she come yet?" They were expecting Maria Dmitrievna Akrasimova, known in society as La Terrible Dragon, a lady distinguished not for wealth or rank, but for common sense and frank plainness of speech. Maria Dmitrievna was known to the imperial family as well as to all Moscow and Petersburg, and both cities wondered at her, laughed privately at her rudenesses, and told good stories about her, while nonetheless all without exception respected and feared her. In the Count's room, which was full of tobacco smoke, they talked of the war that had been announced in a manifesto, and about the recruiting. None of them had yet seen the manifesto, but they all knew it had appeared. The Count sat on the sofa between two guests who were smoking and talking. He neither smoked nor talked, but bending his head first to one side and then to the other watched the smokers with evident pleasure and listened to the conversation of his two neighbors, whom he egged on against each other. One of them was a sallow, clean-shaven civilian with a thin and wrinkled face, already growing old, though he was dressed like a most fashionable young man. He sat with his legs up on the sofa as if quite at home and, having stuck an amber mouthpiece far into his mouth, was inhaling the smoke spasmodically and screwing up his eyes. This was an old bachelor, Shinshin, a cousin of the Countess, a man with a sharp tongue as they said in Moscow society. He seemed to be condescending to his companion. The latter, a fresh, rosy officer of the guards, irreproachably washed, brushed, and buttoned, held his pipe in the middle of his mouth and with red lips gently inhaled the smoke, letting it escape from his handsome mouth in rings. This was Lieutenant Berg, an officer in the Semyonov regiment with whom Boris was to travel to join the army, and about whom Natasha had teased her elder sister Vera, speaking of Berg as her intended. The Count sat between them and listened attentively. His favorite occupation when not playing Boston, a card game he was very fond of, was that of listener, especially when he succeeded in setting two loquacious talkers at one another. "Well, then, old chap, Montrez Honorable Alphonse Karlovich," said Shinshin, laughing ironically and mixing the most ordinary Russian expressions with the choicest French phrases, which was a peculiarity of his speech. "Vous comptez vous faire des rentes à l'état? Asterisk, you want to make something out of your company? Asterisk, you expect to make an income out of the government?" "No, Peter Nikolaevich, I only want to show that in the cavalry the advantages are far less than in the infantry. Just consider my own position now, Peter Nikolaevich." Berg always spoke quietly, politely, and with great precision. His conversation always related entirely to himself. He would remain calm and silent when the talk related to any topic that had no direct bearing on himself. He could remain silent for hours without being at all put out of countenance himself or making others uncomfortable, but as soon as the conversation concerned himself he would begin to talk circumstantially and with evident satisfaction. "Consider my position, Peter Nikolaevich. Were I in the cavalry I should get not more than 200 rubles every 4 months, even with the rank of lieutenant, but as it is I receive 230, said he, looking at Shinshin and the Count with a joyful, pleasant smile, as if it were obvious to him that his success must always be the chief desire of everyone else. "Besides that, Peter Nikolaevich, by exchanging into the Guards I shall be in a more prominent position," continued Berg, "and vacancies occur much more frequently in the Foot Guards. Then just think what can be done with 230 rubles. I even managed to put a little aside and to send something to my father," he went on, emitting a smoke ring. "La balance why ist, asterisk a German knows how to skin a flint, as the proverb says," remarked Shinshin, moving his pipe to the other side of his mouth and winking at the Count. "Asterisk so that squares matters." The Count burst out laughing. The other guests, seeing that Shinshin was talking, came up to listen. Berg, oblivious of irony or indifference, continued to explain how by exchanging into the Guards he had already gained a step on his old comrades of the Cadet Corps, how in wartime the company commander might get killed and he, as senior in the company, might easily succeed to the post, how popular he was with everyone in the regiment, and how satisfied his father was with him. Berg evidently enjoyed narrating all this, and did not seem to suspect that others, too, might have their own interests. But all he said was so prettily sedate, and the naivete of his youthful egotism was so obvious, that he disarmed his hearers. "Well, my boy, you'll get along wherever you go, foot or horse, that I'll warrant," said Shinshin, patting him on the shoulder and taking his feet off the sofa. Berg smiled joyously. The Count, followed by his guests, went into the drawing room. It was just the moment before a big dinner when the assembled guests, expecting the summons to Zakuska, Avoid engaging in any long conversation but think it necessary to move about and talk, in order to show that they are not at all impatient for their food. The host and hostess look toward the door, and now and then glance at one another, and the visitors try to guess from these glances who, or what, they are waiting for, some important relation who has not yet arrived, or a dish that is not yet ready. Hors d'oeuvres. Pierre had come just at dinner time and was sitting awkwardly in the middle of the drawing room on the first chair he had come across, blocking the way for everyone. The Countess tried to make him talk, but he went on naively looking around through his spectacles as if in search of somebody and answered all her questions in monosyllables. He was in the way and was the only one who did not notice the fact. Most of the guests, knowing of the affair with the bear, looked with curiosity at this big, stout, quiet man, wondering how such a clumsy, modest fellow could have played such a prank on a policeman. "You have only lately arrived?" the Countess asked him. "Oh, madam," replied he, looking around him. "You have not yet seen my husband?" "Non, madam." He smiled quite inappropriately. "You have been in Paris recently, I believe? I suppose it's very interesting." "Very interesting." The Countess exchanged glances with Anna Mikhailovna. The latter understood that she was being asked to entertain this young man, and sitting down beside him she began to speak about his father, but he answered her, as he had the Countess, only in monosyllables. The other guests were all conversing with one another. "The Razumovskis. It was charming. You are very kind." "Countess Apraxina," was heard on all sides. The Countess rose and went into the ballroom. "Moria Dmitrievna," came her voice from there. "Herself," came the answer in a rough voice, and Moria Dmitrievna entered the room. All the unmarried ladies and even the married ones except the very oldest rose. Moria Dmitrievna paused at the door. Tall and stout, holding high her 50-year-old head with its grey curls, she stood surveying the guests, and leisurely arranged her wide sleeves as if rolling them up. Moria Dmitrievna always spoke in Russian. "Health and happiness to her whose name day we are keeping and to her children," she said, in her loud, full-toned voice which drowned all others. "Well, you old sinner," she went on, turning to the Count who was kissing her hand, "you're feeling dull in Moscow, I dare say? Nowhere to hunt with your dogs? But what is to be done, old man? Just see how these nestlings are growing up," and she pointed to the girls. "You must look for husbands for them whether you like it or not." "Well," said she, "how's my Cossack?" Moria Dmitrievna always called Natasha a Cossack, and she stroked the child's arm as she came up fearless and gay to kiss her hand. "I know she's a scamp of a girl, but I like her." She took a pair of pear-shaped ruby earrings from her huge reticule and, having given them to the rosy Natasha, who beamed with the pleasure of her Saint's Day fete, turned away at once and addressed herself to Pierre. Friend. Come here a bit," said she, assuming a soft high tone of voice. "Come here, my friend," and she ominously tucked up her sleeves still higher. Pierre approached, looking at her in a childlike way through his spectacles. Come nearer, friend. I used to be the only one to tell your father the truth when he was in favor, and in your case it's my evident duty." She paused. All were silent, expectant of what was to follow, for this was clearly only a prelude. "A fine lad. My word. A fine lad. His father lies on his deathbed and he amuses himself setting a policeman astride a bear. For shame, sir, for shame. It would be better if you went to the war." She turned away and gave her hand to the Count, who could hardly keep from laughing. "Well, I suppose it is time we were at table," said Marya Dmitrievna. The Count went in first with Marya Dmitrievna. The Countess followed on the arm of a colonel of hussars, a man of importance to them because Nicholas was to go with him to the regiment. Then came Anna Mikhailovna with Shinshin. Berg gave his arm to Vera. The smiling Julie Karagina went in with Nicholas. After them other couples followed, filling the whole dining hall, and last of all the children, tutors, and governesses followed singly. The footmen began moving about, chairs scraped, the band struck up in the gallery, and the guests settled down in their places. Then the strains of the Count's household band were replaced by the clatter of knives and forks, the voices of visitors, and the soft steps of the footmen. At one end of the table sat the Countess with Marya Dmitrievna on her right and Anna Mikhailovna on her left. The other lady visitors were farther down. At the other end sat the Count, with the hussar colonel on his left and Shinshin and the other male visitors on his right. Midway down the long table on one side sat the grown-up young people, Vera beside Berg and Pierre beside Boris, and on the other side, the children, tutors, and governesses. From behind the crystal decanters and fruit vases, the Count kept glancing at his wife and her tall cap with its light blue ribbons, and busily filled his neighbor's glasses, not neglecting his own. The Countess in turn, without omitting her duties as hostess, threw significant glances from behind the pineapples at her husband, whose face and bald head seemed by their redness to contrast more than usual with his grey hair. At the ladies' end an even chatter of voices was heard all the time. At the men's end the voices sounded louder and louder, especially that of the colonel of hussars who, growing more and more flushed, ate and drank so much that the Count held him up as a pattern to the other guests. Berg with tender smiles was saying to Vera that love is not an earthly but a heavenly feeling. Boris was telling his new friend Pierre who the guests were and exchanging glances with Natasha, who was sitting opposite. Pierre spoke little but examined the new faces, and ate a great deal. Of the two soups he chose turtle with savory patties and went on to the game without omitting a single dish or one of the wines. These latter the butler thrust mysteriously forward, wrapped in a napkin, from behind the next man's shoulders and whispered, "Dry Madeira, Hungarian, or Rhine wine as the case might be." Of the 4 crystal glasses engraved with the Count's monogram that stood before his plate, Pierre held out one at random and drank with enjoyment, gazing with ever-increasing amiability at the other guests. Natasha, who sat opposite, was looking at Boris as girls of 13 look at the boy they are in love with and have just kissed for the first time. Sometimes that same look fell on Pierre, and that funny lively little girl's look made him inclined to laugh without knowing why. Nicholas sat at some distance from Sonia, beside Julie Karagina, to whom he was again talking with the same involuntary smile. Sonia wore a company smile but was evidently tormented by jealousy. Now she turned pale, now blushed and strained every nerve to overhear what Nicholas and Julie were saying to one another. The governess kept looking round uneasily as if preparing to resent any slight that might be put upon the children. The German tutor was trying to remember all the dishes, wines, and kinds of dessert, in order to send a full description of the dinner to his people in Germany, and he felt greatly offended when the butler with a bottle wrapped in a napkin passed him by. He frowned, trying to appear as if he did not want any of that wine, but was mortified because no one would understand that it was not to quench his thirst or from greediness that he wanted it, but simply from a conscientious desire for knowledge. Chapter 19. At the men's end of the table the talk grew more and more animated. The colonel told them that the declaration of war had already appeared in Petersburg and that a copy, which he had himself seen, had that day been forwarded by courier to the commander-in-chief. "And why the deuce are we going to fight Bonaparte?" remarked Shinshin. "He has stopped Austria's cackle, and I fear it will be our turn next." The colonel was a stout, tall, plethoric German, evidently devoted to the service and patriotically Russian. He resented Shinshin's remark. "It is for the reason, my good sir," said he, speaking with a German accent, "for the reason that the emperor knows that. He declares in the manifesto that he cannot view with indifference the danger of reightening Russia and that the safety and dignity of the empire as well as the sanctity of its alliances." He spoke this last word with particular emphasis as if in it lay the gist of the matter. Then with the unerring official memory that characterized him, he repeated from the opening words of the manifesto. "And the wish, which constitutes the emperor's sole and absolute aim, to establish peace in Europe on firm foundations, has now decided him to dispatch part of the army abroad and to create a new condition for the attainment of that purpose. That, my dear sir, is why," he concluded, drinking a tumbler of wine with dignity and looking to the Count for approval. "Connaissez vous le proverbe * Jerome, Jerome, do not roam, but turn spindles at home," said Shinshin, puckering his brows and smiling. "Silla nous convienta merville. * 2. Suvorov now, he knew what he was about. Yet they beat him a plate couture * 3. And where are we to find Suvorovs now? Je vous demande un peu * 4, said he, continually changing from French to Russian. Do you know the proverb? * 2. That suits us down to the ground. * 3. Hollow. * 4. I just ask you that. We must fight to the last teardrop of our blood, said the colonel, thumping the table, and we must tie for our emperor, and then all will be well. And we must discuss it as little as possible. He dwelt particularly on the word possible. As possible, he ended, again turning to the Count. That is how we old hussars look at it, and there's an end of it. And how do you, a young man and a young hussar, how do you judge of it? He added, addressing Nicholas, who when he heard that the war was being discussed had turned from his partner with eyes and ears intent on the colonel. I am quite of your opinion, replied Nicholas, flaming up, turning his plate round and moving his wineglasses about with as much decision and desperation as though he were at that moment facing some great danger. I am convinced that we Russians must die or conquer, he concluded, conscious, as were others, after the words were uttered, that his remarks were too enthusiastic and emphatic for the occasion and were therefore awkward. What you said just now was splendid, said his partner Julie. Sonia trembled all over and blushed to her ears and behind them and down to her neck and shoulders while Nicholas was speaking. Pierre listened to the colonel's speech and nodded approvingly. That's fine, said he. The young man's a real hussar, shouted the colonel, again thumping the table. What are you making such a noise about over there? Marya Dmitrievna's deep voice suddenly inquired from the other end of the table. What are you thumping the table for? She demanded of the hussar, and why are you exciting yourself? Do you think the French are here? I am speaking the truce, replied the hussar with a smile. It's all about the war, the Count shouted down the table. You know my son's going, Marya Dmitrievna? My son is going. I have 4 sons in the army, but still I don't fret. It is all in God's hands. You may die in your bed or God may spare you in a battle, replied Marya Dmitrievna's deep voice, which easily carried the whole length of the table. That's true. Once more the conversations concentrated, The ladies at the one end and the men's at the other. You won't ask, Natasha's little brother was saying. I know you won't ask. I will, replied Natasha. Her face suddenly flushed with reckless and joyous resolution. She half rose, by a glance inviting Pierre, who sat opposite, to listen to what was coming, and turning to her mother. Mama rang out the clear contralto notes of her childish voice, audible the whole length of the table. What is it? Asked the Countess, startled, but seeing by her daughter's face that it was only mischief, she shook a finger at her sternly with a threatening and forbidding movement of her head. The conversation was hushed. Mama, what sweets are we going to have? And Natasha's voice sounded still more firm and resolute. The Countess tried to frown, but could not. Marya Dmitrievna shook her fat finger. Karsak, she said threateningly. Most of the guests, uncertain how to regard this sally, looked at the elders. You had better take care, said the Countess. Mama, what sweets are we going to have? Natasha again cried boldly, with saucy gaiety, confident that her prank would be taken in good part. Sonia and fat little Petya doubled up with laughter. You see, I have asked, whispered Natasha to her little brother and to Pierre, glancing at him again. Ice pudding, but you won't get any, said Marya Dmitrievna. Natasha saw there was nothing to be afraid of, and so she braved even Marya Dmitrievna. Marya Dmitrievna, what kind of ice pudding? I don't like ice cream. Carrot ices. No. What kind, Marya Dmitrievna? What kind? She almost screamed. I want to know. Marya Dmitrievna and the Countess burst out laughing, and all the guests joined in. Everyone laughed, not at Marya Dmitrievna's answer but at the incredible boldness and smartness of this little girl who had dared to treat Marya Dmitrievna in this fashion. Natasha only desisted when she had been told that there would be pineapple ice. Before the ices, champagne was served round. The band again struck up, the Count and Countess kissed, and the guests, leaving their seats, went up to congratulate the Countess, and reached across the table to clink glasses with the Count, with the children, and with one another. Again the footmen rushed about, chairs scraped, and in the same order in which they had entered but with redder faces, the guests returned to the drawing-room and to the Count's study. Chapter 20. The card tables were drawn out, sets made up for Boston, and the Count's visitors settled themselves, some in the two drawing-rooms, some in the sitting-room, some in the library. The Count, holding his cards fanwise, kept himself with difficulty from dropping into his usual after-dinner nap, and laughed at everything. The young people, at the Countess' instigation, gathered round the clavichord and harp. Julie by general request played first. After she had played a little air with variations on the harp, she joined the other young ladies in begging Natasha and Nicholas, who were noted for their musical talent, to sing something. Natasha, who was treated as though she were grown up, was evidently very proud of this but at the same time felt shy. What shall we sing? She said. The Brook, suggested Nicholas. Well, then, let's be quick. Boris, come here, said Natasha. But where is Sonia? She looked round and seeing that her friend was not in the room ran to look for her. Running into Sonia's room and not finding her there, Natasha ran to the nursery, but Sonia was not there either. Natasha concluded that she must be on the chest in the passage. The chest in the passage was the place of mourning for the younger female generation in the Rostov household. And there in fact was Sonia lying face downward on nurse's dirty feather bed on the top of the chest, crumpling her gauzy pink dress under her, hiding her face with her slender fingers, and sobbing so convulsively that her bare little shoulders shook. Natasha's face, which had been so radiantly happy all that Saint's Day, suddenly changed. Her eyes became fixed, and then a shiver passed down her broad neck and the corners of her mouth drooped. "Sonia, what is it? What is the matter?" "Oh, oh, oh." And Natasha's large mouth widened, making her look quite ugly, and she began to wail like a baby without knowing why, except that Sonia was crying. Sonia tried to lift her head to answer but could not, and hid her face still deeper in the bed. Natasha wept, sitting on the blue-striped feather bed and hugging her friend. With an effort, Sonia sat up and began wiping her eyes and explaining. "Nicholas is going away in a week's time. His papers have come, he told me himself. But still I should not cry," and she showed a paper she held in her hand with the verses Nicholas had written. "Still, I should not cry, but you can't, no one can understand, what a soul he hath." And she began to cry again because he had such a noble soul. "It's all very well for you. I am not envious. I love you and Boris also," she went on, gaining a little strength. "He is nice, there are no difficulties in your way. But Nicholas is my cousin, one would have to, the Metropolitan himself, and even then it can't be done. And besides, if she tells Mama," Sonia looked upon the Countess as her mother and called her so, "that I am spoiling Nicholas' career and am heartless and ungrateful, while truly, God is my witness," and she made the sign of the cross, "I love her so much, and all of you, only Vera. And what for? What have I done to her? I am so grateful to you that I would willingly sacrifice everything, only I have nothing." Sonia could not continue, and again hid her face in her hands and in the feather bed. Natasha began consoling her, but her face showed that she understood all the gravity of her friend's trouble. "Sonia," she suddenly exclaimed, as if she had guessed the true reason of her friend's sorrow, "I'm sure Vera has said something to you since dinner? Hasn't she?" "Yes, these verses Nicholas wrote himself and I copied some others, and she found them on my table and said she'd show them to Mama, and that I was ungrateful, and that Mama would never allow him to marry me, but that he'll marry Julie. You see how he's been with her all day. Natasha, what have I done to deserve it?" And again she began to sob, more bitterly than before. Natasha lifted her up, hugged her, and, smiling through her tears, began comforting her. "Sonia, don't believe her, darling. Don't believe her. Do you remember how we and Nicholas, all three of us, talked in the sitting room after supper? Why, we settled how everything was to be. I don't quite remember how, but don't you remember that it could all be arranged and how nice it all was? There's Uncle Shinshin's brother has married his first cousin. And we are only second cousins, you know. And Boris says it is quite possible. You know I have told him all about it. And he is so clever and so good," said Natasha. "Don't you cry, Sonia, dear love, darling Sonia," and she kissed her and laughed. "Vera's spiteful, never mind her, and all will come right and she won't say anything to Mama. Nicholas will tell her himself, and he doesn't care at all for Julie." Natasha kissed her on the hair. Sonia sat up. The little kitten brightened, its eyes shone, and it seemed ready to lift its tail, jump down on its soft paws, and begin playing with the ball of worsted as a kitten should. "Do you think so? Really? Truly?" she said, quickly smoothing her frock and hair. "Really, truly," answered Natasha, pushing in a crisp lock that had strayed from under her friend's plaits. Both laughed. "Well, let's go and sing the brook. Come along. Do you know, that fat Pierre who sat opposite me is so funny," said Natasha, stopping suddenly. "I feel so happy." And she set off at a run along the passage. Sonia, shaking off some down which clung to her and tucking away the verses in the bosom of her dress close to her bony little chest, ran after Natasha down the passage into the sitting room with flushed face and light, joyous steps. At the visitors' request, the young people sang the quartet, "The Brook," with which everyone was delighted. Then Nicholas sang a song he had just learned. At night time in the moon's fair glow, how sweet, as fancies wander free, to feel that in this world there's one who still is thinking but of thee, that while her fingers touch the harp wafting sweet music o'er the lea, it is for thee thus swells her heart, sighing its message out to thee. A day or two, then bliss unspoilt, but oh, till then I cannot live. He had not finished the last verse before the young people began to get ready to dance in the large hall, and the sound of the feet and the coughing of the musicians were heard from the gallery. Pierre was sitting in the drawing-room where Shinshin had engaged him, as a man recently returned from abroad, in a political conversation in which several others joined but which bored Pierre. When the music began, Natasha came in and walking straight up to Pierre said, laughing and blushing, "Mama told me to ask you to join the dancers." "I am afraid of mixing the figures," Pierre replied, "but if you will be my teacher," and lowering his big arm he offered it to the slender little girl. While the couples were arranging themselves and the musicians tuning up, Pierre sat down with his little partner. Natasha was perfectly happy. She was dancing with a grown-up man who had been abroad. She was sitting in a conspicuous place and talking to him like a grown-up lady. She had a fan in her hand that one of the ladies had given her to hold. Assuming quite the pose of a society woman, heaven knows when and where she had learned it, she talked with her partner, fanning herself and smiling over the fan. "Dear, dear, just look at her," exclaimed the Countess as she crossed the ballroom, pointing to Natasha. Natasha blushed and laughed. "Well, really, Mama, why should you? What is there to be surprised at?" In the midst of the third écossais there was a clatter of chairs being pushed back in the sitting room where the Count and Maria Dmitrievna had been playing cards with the majority of the more distinguished and older visitors. They now, stretching themselves after sitting so long, and replacing their purses and pocketbooks, entered the ballroom. First came Maria Dmitrievna and the Count, both with merry countenances. The Count, with playful ceremony somewhat in ballet style, offered his bent arm to Maria Dmitrievna. He drew himself up, a smile of debonair gallantry lit up his face, and as soon as the last figure of the écossais was ended, he clapped his hands to the musicians and shouted up to their gallery, addressing the first violin. "Seaman, do you know the Daniel Cooper?" This was the Count's favorite dance, which he had danced in his youth. Strictly speaking, Daniel Cooper was one figure of the Anglaise. "Look at Papa," shouted Natasha to the whole company, and quite forgetting that she was dancing with a grown-up partner, she bent her curly head to her knees and made the whole room ring with her laughter. And indeed everybody in the room looked with a smile of pleasure at the jovial old gentleman, who, standing beside his tall and stout partner, Maria Dmitrievna, curved his arms, beat time, straightened his shoulders, turned out his toes, tapped gently with his foot, and, by a smile that broadened his round face more and more, prepared the onlookers for what was to follow. As soon as the provocatively gay strains of Daniel Cooper, somewhat resembling those of a merry peasant dance, began to sound, all the doorways of the ballroom were suddenly filled by the domestic serfs, the men on one side and the women on the other, who with beaming faces had come to see their master making merry. "Just look at the master. A regular eagle he is," loudly remarked the nurse, as she stood in one of the doorways. The Count danced well and knew it. But his partner could not and did not want to dance well. Her enormous figure stood erect, her powerful arms hanging down. She had handed her reticule to the Countess, and only her stern but handsome face really joined in the dance. What was expressed by the whole of the Count's plump figure, in Marya Dmitrievna found expression only in her more and more beaming face and quivering nose. But if the Count, getting more and more into the swing of it, charmed the spectators by the unexpectedness of his adroit maneuvers and the agility with which he capered about on his light feet, Marya Dmitrievna produced no less impression by slight exertions, the least effort to move her shoulders or bend her arms when turning, or stamp her foot, which everyone appreciated in view of her size and habitual severity. The dance grew livelier and livelier. The other couples could not attract a moment's attention to their own evolutions and did not even try to do so. All were watching the Count and Marya Dmitrievna. Natasha kept pulling everyone by sleeve or dress, urging them to look at Papa, though as it was they never took their eyes off the couple. In the intervals of the dance the Count, breathing deeply, waved and shouted to the musicians to play faster. Faster, faster, and faster. Lightly, more lightly, and yet more lightly whirled the Count, flying round Marya Dmitrievna, now on his toes, now on his heels, until, turning his partner round to her seat, he executed the final pas, raising his soft foot backwards, bowing his perspiring head, smiling and making a wide sweep with his arm, amid a thunder of applause and laughter led by Natasha. Both partners stood still, breathing heavily and wiping their faces with their cambric handkerchiefs. "That's how we used to dance in our time, ma chère," said the Count. "That was a Daniel Cooper," exclaimed Marya Dmitrievna, tucking up her sleeves and puffing heavily. Chapter 21. While in the Rostovs' ballroom the sixth Anglaise was being danced, to a tune in which the weary musicians blundered, and while tired footmen and cooks were getting the supper, Count Bezukov had a sixth stroke. The doctors pronounced recovery impossible. After a mute confession, communion was administered to the dying man, preparations made for the sacrament of unction, and in his house there was the bustle and thrill of suspense usual at such moments. Outside the house, beyond the gates, a group of undertakers, who hid whenever a carriage drove up, waited in expectation of an important order for an expensive funeral. The military governor of Moscow, who had been assiduous in sending aides-de-camp to inquire after the Count's health, came himself that evening to bid a last farewell to the celebrated grandee of Catherine's court, Count Bezukov. The magnificent reception room was crowded. Everyone stood up respectfully when the military governor, having stayed about half an hour alone with the dying man, passed out, slightly acknowledging their bows and trying to escape as quickly as possible from the glances fixed on him by the doctors, clergy, and relatives of the family. Prince Vasily, who had grown thinner and paler during the last few days, escorted him to the door, repeating something to him several times in low tones. When the military governor had gone, Prince Vasily sat down all alone on a chair in the ballroom, crossing one leg high over the other, leaning his elbow on his knee and covering his face with his hand. After sitting so for a while he rose, and, looking about him with frightened eyes, went with unusually hurried steps down the long corridor leading to the back of the house, to the room of the eldest princess. Those who were in the dimly lit reception room spoke in nervous whispers, and, whenever anyone went into or came from the dying man's room, grew silent and gazed with eyes full of curiosity or expectancy at his door, which creaked slightly when opened. "The limits of human life are fixed and may not be overpassed," said an old priest to a lady who had taken a seat beside him and was listening naively to his words. "I wonder, is it not too late to administer unction?" asked the lady, adding the priest's clerical title, as if she had no opinion of her own on the subject. "Ah, madam, it is a great sacrament," replied the priest, passing his hand over the thin grizzled strands of hair combed back across his bald head. Who was that? The military governor himself was being asked at the other side of the room. "How young-looking he is." "Yes, and he is over 60. I hear the count no longer recognizes anyone." They wished to administer the sacrament of unction. "I knew someone who received that sacrament 7 times. The second princess had just come from the sickroom with her eyes red from weeping and sat down beside Dr. Lorraine, who was sitting in a graceful pose under a portrait of Catherine, leaning his elbow on a table. "Beautiful," said the doctor in answer to a remark about the weather. "The weather is beautiful, princess, and besides, in Moscow one feels as if one were in the country." "Yes, indeed," replied the princess with a sigh. "So he may have something to drink." Lorraine considered. "Has he taken his medicine?" "Yes." The doctor glanced at his watch. "Take a glass of boiled water and put a pinch of cream of tartar," and he indicated with his delicate fingers what he meant by a pinch. "Dear has never been a gas," a German doctor was saying to an aide-de-camp, "that one lifts after the third stroke." "And what a well-preserved man he was," remarked the aide-de-camp. "And who will inherit his wealth?" he added in a whisper. "It won't go begging," replied the German with a smile. Everyone again looked toward the door, which creaked as the second princess went in with the drink she had prepared according to Lorraine's instructions. The German doctor went up to Lorraine. "Do you think he can last till morning?" asked the German, addressing Lorraine in French which he pronounced badly. Lorraine, pursing up his lips, waved a severely negative finger before his nose. "Tonight, not later," said he in a low voice, and he moved away with a decorous smile of self-satisfaction at being able clearly to understand and state the patient's condition. Meanwhile, Prince Vasily had opened the door into the princess's room. In this room it was almost dark. Only 2 tiny lamps were burning before the icons, and there was a pleasant scent of flowers and burnt pastels. The room was crowded with small pieces of furniture, whatnots, cupboards, and little tables. The quilt of a high, white feather bed was just visible behind a screen. A small dog began to bark. "Ah, is it you, cousin?" She rose and smoothed her hair, which was as usual so extremely smooth that it seemed to be made of one piece with her head and covered with varnish. "Has anything happened?" she asked. "I am so terrified." "No, there is no change. I only came to have a talk about business, Katish," muttered the prince, seating himself wearily on the chair she had just vacated. "You have made the place warm, I must say," he remarked. "Well, sit down, let's have a talk." Catherine. "I thought perhaps something had happened," she said with her unchanging stonily severe expression, and, sitting down opposite the prince, she prepared to listen. "I wish to get a nap, mon cousin, but I can't." "Well, my dear," said Prince Vasily, taking her hand and bending it downwards as was his habit. It was plain that this "well" referred to much that they both understood without naming. The princess, who had a straight, rigid body, abnormally long for her legs, looked directly at Prince Vasily with no sign of emotion in her prominent grey eyes. Then she shook her head and glanced up at the icons with a sigh. This might have been taken as an expression of sorrow and devotion, or of weariness and hope of resting before long. Prince Vasily understood it as an expression of weariness. "And I," he said. "Do you think it is easier for me? I am as worn out as a post horse, but still I must have a talk with you, Katish, a very serious talk." Prince Vasily said no more, and his cheeks began to twitch nervously, now on one side, now on the other, giving his face an unpleasant expression which was never to be seen on it in a drawing room. His eyes too seemed strange. At one moment they looked impudently sly, and at the next glanced round in alarm. The princess, holding her little dog on her lap with her thin bony hands, looked attentively into Prince Vasily's eyes, evidently resolved not to be the first to break silence, if she had to wait till morning. "Well, you see, my dear princess and cousin, Catherine Semenovna," continued Prince Vasily, returning to his theme, apparently not without an inner struggle, "at such a moment as this one must think of everything. One must think of the future, of all of you. I love you all, like children of my own, as you know." The princess continued to look at him without moving, and with the same dull expression. "And then of course my family has also to be considered," Prince Vasily went on, testily pushing away a little table without looking at her. "You know, Katish, that you three sisters, Mamontov, and my wife are the Count's only direct heirs. I know how hard it is for you to talk or think of such matters. It is no easier for me, but, my dear, I am getting on for 60 and must be prepared for anything. Do you know I have sent for Pierre?" The Count, pointing to his portrait, definitely demanded that he should be called. Prince Vasily looked questioningly at the princess, but could not make out whether she was considering what he had just said or whether she was simply looking at him. "There is one thing I constantly pray God to grant, mon cousin," she replied, "and it is that he would be merciful to him and would allow his noble soul peacefully to leave this." "Yes, yes, of course," interrupted Prince Vasily impatiently, rubbing his bald head and angrily pulling back toward him the little table that he had pushed away. "But, in short, the fact is, you know yourself that last winter the Count made a will by which he left all his property, not to us his direct heirs, but to Pierre." "He has made wills enough," quietly remarked the princess. "But he cannot leave the estate to Pierre. Pierre is illegitimate." "But, my dear," said Prince Vasily suddenly, clutching the little table and becoming more animated and talking more rapidly, "what if a letter has been written to the Emperor in which the Count asks for Pierre's legitimation? Do you understand that in consideration of the Count's services, his request would be granted?" The princess smiled, as people do who think they know more about the subject under discussion than those they are talking with. "I can tell you more," continued Prince Vasily, seizing her hand. "That letter was written, though it was not sent, and the Emperor knew of it. The only question is, has it been destroyed or not? If not, then as soon as all is over," and Prince Vasily sighed to intimate what he meant by the words "all is over," "and the Count's papers are opened, the will and letter will be delivered to the Emperor, and the petition will certainly be granted. Pierre will get everything as the legitimate son." "And our share?" asked the princess, smiling ironically, as if anything might happen, only not that. "But, my poor Katish, it is as clear as daylight. He will then be the legal heir to everything, and you won't get anything. You must know, my dear, whether the will and letter were written, and whether they have been destroyed or not. And if they have somehow been overlooked, you ought to know where they are, and must find them, because—" "What next?" the princess interrupted, smiling sardonically and not changing the expression of her eyes. "I am a woman, and you think we are all stupid, but I know this: an illegitimate son cannot inherit, en-baited. Asterisk, she added, as if supposing that this translation of the word would effectively prove to Prince Vasily the invalidity of his contention. A bastard. Well, really, Katish, can't you understand? You are so intelligent. How is it you don't see that if the Count has written a letter to the Emperor begging him to recognize Pierre as legitimate, it follows that Pierre will not be Pierre but will become Count Bezukhov, and will then inherit everything under the will? And if the will and letter are not destroyed, then you will have nothing but the consolation of having been dutiful et tout ce qui ensuite, that's certain. And all that follows therefrom. I know the will was made, but I also know that it is invalid, and you, mon cousin, seem to consider me a perfect fool, said the princess with the expression women assume when they suppose they are saying something witty and stinging. My dear Princess Catherine Semenovna, began Prince Vasily impatiently, I came here not to wrangle with you, but to talk about your interests as with a kinswoman, a good, kind, true relation. And I tell you for the 10th time that if the letter to the Emperor and the will in Pierre's favor are among the Count's papers, then, my dear girl, you and your sisters are not heiresses. If you don't believe me, then believe an expert. I have just been talking to Dmitri Onufrich, the family solicitor, and he says the same. At this a sudden change evidently took place in the princess's ideas. Her thin lips grew white, though her eyes did not change, and her voice when she began to speak passed through such transitions as she herself evidently did not expect. That would be a fine thing, said she. I never wanted anything and I don't now. She pushed the little dog off her lap and smoothed her dress. And this is gratitude, this is recognition for those who have sacrificed everything for his sake, she cried. It's splendid. Fine. I don't want anything, Prince. Yes, but you are not the only one. There are your sisters, replied Prince Vasily. But the princess did not listen to him. Yes, I knew it long ago but had forgotten. I knew that I could expect nothing but meanness, deceit, envy, intrigue, and ingratitude, the blackest ingratitude in this house. Do you or do you not know where that will is? Insisted Prince Vasily, his cheeks twitching more than ever. Yes, I was a fool. I still believed in people, loved them, and sacrificed myself. But only the base, the vile succeed. I know who has been intriguing. The princess wished to rise, but the prince held her by the hand. She had the air of one who has suddenly lost faith in the whole human race. She gave her companion an angry glance. There is still time, my dear. You must remember, Katish, that it was all done casually in a moment of anger, of illness, and was afterwards forgotten. Our duty, my dear, is to rectify his mistake, to ease his last moments by not letting him commit this injustice, and not to let him die feeling that he is rendering unhappy those who sacrificed everything for him, chimed in the princess, who would again have risen had not the prince still held her fast, though he never could appreciate it. No, mon cousin, she added with a sigh, I shall always remember that in this world one must expect no reward, that in this world there is neither honor nor justice. In this world one has to be cunning and cruel. Now come, be reasonable. I know your excellent heart. No, I have a wicked heart. I know your heart, repeated the prince. I value your friendship and wish you to have as good an opinion of me. Don't upset yourself, and let us talk sensibly while there is still time, be it a day or be it but an hour. Tell me all you know about the will, and above all where it is. You must know. We will take it at once and show it to the Count. He has, no doubt, forgotten it and will wish to destroy it. You understand that my sole desire is conscientiously to carry out his wishes. That is my only reason for being here. I came simply to help him and you. Now I see it all. I know who has been intriguing, I know," cried the princess. "That's not the point, my dear. It's that protégé of yours, that sweet Princess Drubetskaya, that Anna Mikhailovna whom I would not take for a housemaid, the infamous, vile woman. Do not let us lose any time. Ah, don't talk to me. Last winter she wheedled herself in here and told the Count such vile, disgraceful things about us, especially about Sophie, I can't repeat them, that it made the Count quite ill and he would not see us for a whole fortnight. I know it was then he wrote this vile, infamous paper, but I thought the thing was invalid. We've got to it at last, why did you not tell me about it sooner?" "It's in the inlaid portfolio that he keeps under his pillow," said the princess, ignoring his question. "Now I know. Yes, if I have a sin, a great sin, it is hatred of that vile woman," almost shrieked the princess, now quite changed. "And what does she come worming herself in here for? But I will give her a piece of my mind. The time will come." Chapter 22. While these conversations were going on in the reception room and the princess's room, a carriage containing Pierre, who had been sent for, and Anna Mikhailovna, who found it necessary to accompany him, was driving into the court of Count Bezukov's house. As the wheels rolled softly over the straw beneath the windows, Anna Mikhailovna, having turned with words of comfort to her companion, realized that he was asleep in his corner and woke him up. Rousing himself, Pierre followed Anna Mikhailovna out of the carriage, and only then began to think of the interview with his dying father which awaited him. He noticed that they had not come to the front entrance but to the back door. While he was getting down from the carriage steps, two men, who looked like tradespeople, ran hurriedly from the entrance and hid in the shadow of the wall. Pausing for a moment, Pierre noticed several other men of the same kind hiding in the shadow of the house on both sides. But neither Anna Mikhailovna nor the footman nor the coachman, who could not help seeing these people, took any notice of them. "It seems to be all right," Pierre concluded, and followed Anna Mikhailovna. She hurriedly ascended the narrow, dimly lit stone staircase, calling to Pierre, who was lagging behind, to follow. Though he did not see why it was necessary for him to go to the Count at all, still less why he had to go by the back stairs, yet judging by Anna Mikhailovna's air of assurance and haste, Pierre concluded that it was all absolutely necessary. Halfway up the stairs they were almost knocked over by some men who, carrying pails, came running downstairs, their boots clattering. These men pressed close to the wall to let Pierre and Anna Mikhailovna pass and did not evince the least surprise at seeing them there. "Is this the way to the princess's apartments?" asked Anna Mikhailovna of one of them. "Yes," replied a footman in a bold, loud voice, as if anything were now permissible. "The door to the left." "Perhaps the Count did not ask for me," said Pierre when he reached the landing. "I'd better go to my own room." Anna Mikhailovna paused and waited for him to come up. "Ah, my friend," she said, touching his arm as she had done her son's when speaking to him that afternoon, "believe me, I suffer no less than you do, but be a man." "But really, hadn't I better go away?" he asked, looking kindly at her over his spectacles. "Ah, my dear friend, forget the wrongs that may have been done you. Think that he is your father, perhaps in the agony of death." She sighed. "I have loved you like a son from the first. Trust yourself to me, Pierre. I shall not forget your interests." Pierre did not understand a word, but the conviction that all this had to be grew stronger, and he meekly followed Anna Mikhailovna, who was already opening a door. This door led into a back anteroom. An old man, a servant of the princess's, sat in a corner knitting a stocking. Pierre had never been in this part of the house and did not even know of the existence of these rooms. Anna Mikhailovna, addressing a maid who was hurrying past with a decanter on a tray as "my dear" and "my sweet," asked about the princess's health and then led Pierre along a stone passage. The first door on the left led into the princess's apartments. The maid with the decanter in her haste had not closed the door. Everything in the house was done in haste at that time, and Pierre and Anna Mikhailovna in passing instinctively glanced into the room, where Prince Vasily and the eldest princess were sitting close together talking. Seeing them pass, Prince Vasily drew back with obvious impatience, while the princess jumped up and with a gesture of desperation slammed the door with all her might. This action was so unlike her usual composure and the fear depicted on Prince Vasily's face so out of keeping with his dignity that Pierre stopped and glanced inquiringly over his spectacles at his guide. Anna Mikhailovna evinced no surprise, she only smiled faintly and sighed, as if to say that this was no more than she had expected. "Be a man, my friend. I will look after your interests," said she in reply to his look, and went still faster along the passage. Pierre could not make out what it was all about, and still less what watching over his interests meant, but he decided that all these things had to be. From the passage they went into a large, dimly lit room adjoining the Count's reception room. It was one of those sumptuous but cold apartments known to Pierre only from the front approach, but even in this room there now stood an empty bath, and water had been spilled on the carpet. They were met by a deacon with a censer and by a servant who passed out on tiptoe without heeding them. They went into the reception room familiar to Pierre, with two Italian windows opening into the conservatory, with its large bust and full-length portrait of Catherine the Great. The same people were still sitting here in almost the same positions as before, whispering to one another. All became silent and turned to look at the pale, tear-worn Anna Mikhailovna as she entered, and at the big stout figure of Pierre who, hanging his head, meekly followed her. Anna Mikhailovna's face expressed a consciousness that the decisive moment had arrived. With the air of a practical Petersburg lady she now, keeping Pierre close beside her, entered the room even more boldly than that afternoon. She felt that as she brought with her the person the dying man wished to see, her own admission was assured. Casting a rapid glance at all those in the room and noticing the Count's confessor there, she glided up to him with a sort of amble, not exactly bowing yet seeming to grow suddenly smaller, and respectfully received the blessing first of one and then of another priest. "God be thanked that you are in time," said she to one of the priests. "All we relatives have been in such anxiety. This young man is the Count's son," she added more softly. "What a terrible moment." Having said this she went up to the doctor. "Dear doctor," said she, "this young man is the Count's son. Is there any hope?" The doctor cast a rapid glance upwards and silently shrugged his shoulders. Anna Mikhailovna with just the same movement raised her shoulders and eyes, almost closing the latter, sighed, and moved away from the doctor to Pierre. To him, in a particularly respectful and tenderly sad voice, she said, "Trust in his mercy," and pointing out a small sofa for him to sit and wait for her, she went silently toward the door that everyone was watching, and it creaked very slightly as she disappeared behind it. Pierre, having made up his mind to obey his monitress implicitly, moved toward the sofa she had indicated. As soon as Anna Mikhailovna had disappeared, he noticed that the eyes of all in the room turned to him with something more than curiosity and sympathy. He noticed that they whispered to one another, casting significant looks at him with a kind of awe and even servility. A deference such as he had never before received was shown him. A strange lady, the one who had been talking to the priests, rose and offered him her seat. An aide-de-camp picked up and returned a glove Pierre had dropped. The doctors became respectfully silent as he passed by, and moved to make way for him. At first Pierre wished to take another seat so as not to trouble the lady, and also to pick up the glove himself and to pass round the doctors who were not even in his way, but all at once he felt that this would not do, and that tonight he was a person obliged to perform some sort of awful rite which everyone expected of him, and that he was therefore bound to accept their services. He took the glove in silence from the aide-de-camp, and sat down in the lady's chair, placing his huge hands symmetrically on his knees in the naive attitude of an Egyptian statue, and decided in his own mind that all was as it should be, and that in order not to lose his head and do foolish things he must not act on his own ideas tonight, but must yield himself up entirely to the will of those who were guiding him. Not 2 minutes had passed before Prince Vasily, with head erect, majestically entered the room. He was wearing his long coat with 3 stars on his breast. He seemed to have grown thinner since the morning. His eyes seemed larger than usual when he glanced round and noticed Pierre. He went up to him, took his hand, a thing he never used to do, and drew it downwards as if wishing to ascertain whether it was firmly fixed on. "Courage, courage, my friend. He has asked to see you." "That is well," and he turned to go. But Pierre thought it necessary to ask, "How is?" and hesitated, not knowing whether it would be proper to call the dying man the Count, yet ashamed to call him father. "He had another stroke about half an hour ago." "Courage, my friend." Pierre's mind was in such a confused state that the word stroke suggested to him a blow from something. He looked at Prince Vasily in perplexity, and only later grasped that a stroke was an attack of illness. Prince Vasily said something to Lorraine in passing and went through the door on tiptoe. He could not walk well on tiptoe, and his whole body jerked at each step. The eldest princess followed him, and the priests and deacons and some servants also went in at the door. Through that door was heard a noise of things being moved about, and at last Anna Mikhailovna, still with the same expression, pale but resolute in the discharge of duty, ran out and touching Pierre lightly on the arm said, "The divine mercy is inexhaustible. Unction is about to be administered. Come." Pierre went in at the door, stepping on the soft carpet, and noticed that the strange lady, the aide-de-camp, and some of the servants, all followed him in, as if there were now no further need for permission to enter that room. Chapter 23. Pierre well knew this large room divided by columns and an arch, its walls hung round with Persian carpets. The part of the room behind the columns, with a high silk-curtained mahogany bedstead on one side and on the other an immense case containing icons, was brightly illuminated with red light like a Russian church during evening service. Under the gleaming icons stood a long invalid chair, and in that chair on snowy white smooth pillows, evidently freshly changed, Pierre saw, covered to the waist by a bright green quilt, the familiar, majestic figure of his father, Count Bezukov, with that grey manner of hair above his broad forehead which reminded one of a lion, and the deep characteristically noble wrinkles of his handsome, ruddy face. He lay just under the icons, his large thick hands outside the quilt. Into the right hand, which was lying palm downwards, a wax taper had been thrust between forefinger and thumb, and an old servant, bending over from behind the chair, held it in position. By the chair stood the priests, their long hair falling over their magnificent glittering vestments, with lighted tapers in their hands, slowly and solemnly conducting the service. A little behind them stood the 2 younger princesses holding handkerchiefs to their eyes, and just in front of them their eldest sister, Katish, with a vicious and determined look steadily fixed on the icons, as though declaring to all that she could not answer for herself should she glance round. Anna Mikhailovna, with a meek, sorrowful, and all-forgiving expression on her face, stood by the door near the strange lady. Prince Vasily in front of the door, near the invalid chair, a wax taper in his left hand, was leaning his left arm on the carved back of a velvet chair he had turned round for the purpose, and was crossing himself with his right hand, turning his eyes upward each time he touched his forehead. His face wore a calm look of piety and resignation to the will of God. If you do not understand these sentiments, he seemed to be saying, so much the worse for you. Behind him stood the aide-de-camp, the doctors, and the men-servants. The men and women had separated as in church. All were silently crossing themselves, and the reading of the church service, the subdued chanting of deep bass voices, and in the intervals sighs and the shuffling of feet were the only sounds that could be heard. Anna Mikhailovna, with an air of importance that showed that she felt she quite knew what she was about, went across the room to where Pierre was standing and gave him a taper. He lit it and, distracted by observing those around him, began crossing himself with the hand that held the taper. Sophie, the rosy, laughter-loving, youngest princess with the mole, watched him. She smiled, hid her face in her handkerchief, and remained with it hidden for a while. Then looking up and seeing Pierre, she again began to laugh. She evidently felt unable to look at him without laughing, but could not resist looking at him. So to be out of temptation, she slipped quietly behind one of the columns. In the midst of the service, the voices of the priests suddenly ceased. They whispered to one another, and the old servant who was holding the count's hand got up and said something to the ladies. Anna Mikhailovna stepped forward and, stooping over the dying man, beckoned to Lorraine from behind her back. The French doctor held no taper. He was leaning against one of the columns in a respectful attitude, implying that he, a foreigner, in spite of all differences of faith, understood the full importance of the rite now being performed and even approved of it. He now approached the sick man with the noiseless step of one in full vigor of life, with his delicate white fingers raised from the green quilt the hand that was free, and turning sideways felt the pulse and reflected a moment. The sick man was given something to drink. There was a stir around him. Then the people resumed their places and the service continued. During this interval Pierre noticed that Prince Vasily left the chair on which he had been leaning, and, with an air which intimated that he knew what he was about and if others did not understand him it was so much the worse for them, did not go up to the dying man, but passed by him, joined the eldest princess, and moved with her to the side of the room where stood the high bedstead with its silken hangings. On leaving the bed, both Prince Vasily and the princess passed out by a back door, but returned to their places one after the other before the service was concluded. Pierre paid no more attention to this occurrence than to the rest of what went on, having made up his mind once for all that what he saw happening around him that evening was in some way essential. The chanting of the service ceased, and the voice of the priest was heard respectfully congratulating the dying man on having received the sacrament. The dying man lay as lifeless and immovable as before. Around him everyone began to stir. Steps were audible and whispers, among which Anna Mikhailovna's was the most distinct. Pierre heard her say, "Certainly he must be moved onto the bed. Here it will be impossible." The sick man was so surrounded by doctors, princesses, and servants that Pierre could no longer see the reddish-yellow face with its grey menere, which, though he saw other faces as well, he had not lost sight of for a single moment during the whole service. He judged by the cautious movements of those who crowded round the invalid chair that they had lifted the dying man and were moving him. "Catch hold of my arm or you'll drop him," he heard one of the servants say in a frightened whisper. "Catch hold from underneath." "Here!" exclaimed different voices, and the heavy breathing of the bearers and the shuffling of their feet grew more hurried, as if the weight they were carrying were too much for them. As the bearers, among whom was Anna Mikhailovna, passed the young man, he caught a momentary glimpse between their heads and backs of the dying man's high, stout, uncovered chest and powerful shoulders, raised by those who were holding him under the armpits, and of his grey, curly, leonine head. This head, with its remarkably broad brow and cheekbones, its handsome, sensual mouth, and its cold, majestic expression, was not disfigured by the approach of death. It was the same as Pierre remembered it 3 months before, when the Count had sent him to Petersburg. But now this head was swaying helplessly with the uneven movements of the bearers, and the cold, listless gaze fixed itself upon nothing. After a few minutes' bustle beside the high bedstead, those who had carried the sick man dispersed. Anna Mikhailovna touched Pierre's hand and said, "Come." Pierre went with her to the bed on which the sick man had been laid in a stately pose in keeping with the ceremony just completed. He lay with his head propped high on the pillows. His hands were symmetrically placed on the green silk quilt, the palms downward. When Pierre came up, the Count was gazing straight at him, but with a look the significance of which could not be understood by mortal man. Either this look meant nothing but that as long as one has eyes they must look somewhere, or it meant too much. Pierre hesitated, not knowing what to do, and glanced inquiringly at his guide. Anna Mikhailovna made a hurried sign with her eyes, glancing at the sick man's hand and moving her lips as if to send it a kiss. Pierre, carefully stretching his neck so as not to touch the quilt, followed her suggestion and pressed his lips to the large boned, fleshy hand. Neither the hand nor a single muscle of the Count's face stirred. Once more Pierre looked questioningly at Anna Mikhailovna to see what he was to do next. Anna Mikhailovna with her eyes indicated a chair that stood beside the bed. Pierre obediently sat down, his eyes asking if he were doing right. Anna Mikhailovna nodded approvingly. Again Pierre fell into the naively symmetrical pose of an Egyptian statue, evidently distressed that his stout and clumsy body took up so much room and doing his utmost to look as small as possible. He looked at the Count, who still gazed at the spot where Pierre's face had been before he sat down. Anna Mikhailovna indicated by her attitude her consciousness of the pathetic importance of these last moments of meeting between the father and son. This lasted about 2 minutes, which to Pierre seemed an hour. Suddenly the broad muscles and lines of the Count's face began to twitch. The twitching increased, the handsome mouth was drawn to one side. Only now did Pierre realize how near death his father was, and from that distorted mouth issued an indistinct, hoarse sound. Anna Mikhailovna looked attentively at the sick man's eyes, trying to guess what he wanted. She pointed first to Pierre, then to some drink, then named Prince Vasily in an inquiring whisper, then pointed to the quilt. The eyes and face of the sick man showed impatience. He made an effort to look at the servant who stood constantly at the head of the bed. "Wants to turn on the other side," whispered the servant, and got up to turn the Count's heavy body toward the wall. Pierre rose to help him. While the Count was being turned over, one of his arms fell back helplessly and he made a fruitless effort to pull it forward. Whether he noticed the look of terror with which Pierre regarded that lifeless arm, or whether some other thought flitted across his dying brain, at any rate he glanced at the refractory arm, at Pierre's terror-stricken face, and again at the arm, and on his face a feeble, piteous smile appeared, quite out of keeping with his features, that seemed to deride his own helplessness. At sight of this smile, Pierre felt an unexpected quivering in his breast and a tickling in his nose, and tears dimmed his eyes. The sick man was turned on to his side with his face to the wall. He sighed. "He is dozing," said Anna Mikhailovna, observing that one of the princesses was coming to take her turn at watching. "Let us go." Pierre went out. Chapter 24. There was now no one in the reception room except Prince Vasily and the eldest princess, who were sitting under the portrait of Catherine the Great and talking eagerly. As soon as they saw Pierre and his companion, they became silent, and Pierre thought he saw the princess hide something as she whispered, "I can't bear the sight of that woman." "Katish has had tea served in the small drawing room," said Prince Vasily to Anna Mikhailovna. "Go and take something, my poor Anna Mikhailovna, or you will not hold out." To Pierre he said nothing, merely giving his arm a sympathetic squeeze below the shoulder. Pierre went with Anna Mikhailovna into the small drawing room. There is nothing so refreshing after a sleepless night as a cup of this delicious Russian tea, Lorraine was saying with an air of restrained animation as he stood sipping tea from a delicate Chinese handleless cup before a table on which tea and a cold supper were laid in the small circular room. Around the table all who were at Count Bezukov's house that night had gathered to fortify themselves. Pierre well remembered this small circular drawing room with its mirrors and little tables. During balls given at the house, Pierre, who did not know how to dance, had liked sitting in this room to watch the ladies who, as they passed through in their ball dresses with diamonds and pearls on their bare shoulders, looked at themselves in the brilliantly lighted mirrors which repeated their reflections several times. Now this same room was dimly lighted by 2 candles. On one small table tea things and supper dishes stood in disorder, and in the middle of the night a motley throng of people sat there, not merry-making, but somberly whispering, and betraying by every word and movement that they none of them forgot what was happening and what was about to happen in the bedroom. Pierre did not eat anything, though he would very much have liked to. He looked inquiringly at his monitress and saw that she was again going on tiptoe to the reception room where they had left Prince Vasily and the eldest princess. Pierre concluded that this also was essential, and after a short interval followed her. Anna Mikhailovna was standing beside the princess, and they were both speaking in excited whispers. "Permit me, princess, to know what is necessary and what is not necessary," said the younger of the 2 speakers, evidently in the same state of excitement as when she had slammed the door of her room. "But, my dear princess," answered Anna Mikhailovna blandly but impressively, blocking the way to the bedroom and preventing the other from passing, "won't this be too much for poor uncle at a moment when he needs repose? Worldly conversation at a moment when his soul is already prepared." Prince Vasily was seated in an easy chair in his familiar attitude, with one leg crossed high above the other. His cheeks, which were so flabby that they looked heavier below, were twitching violently, but he wore the air of a man little concerned in what the 2 ladies were saying. "Come, my dear Anna Mikhailovna, let Katish do as she pleases. You know how fond the Count is of her." "I don't even know what is in this paper," said the younger of the 2 ladies, addressing Prince Vasily and pointing to an inlaid portfolio she held in her hand. "All I know is that his real will is in his writing table, and this is a paper he has forgotten." She tried to pass Anna Mikhailovna, but the latter sprang so as to bar her path. "I know, my dear, kind princess," said Anna Mikhailovna, seizing the portfolio so firmly that it was plain she would not let go easily. "Dear princess, I beg and implore you, have some pity on him. Je vous en conjure." The princess did not reply. Their efforts in the struggle for the portfolio were the only sounds audible, but it was evident that if the princess did speak, her words would not be flattering to Anna Mikhailovna. Though the latter held on tenaciously, her voice lost none of its honeyed firmness and softness. "Pierre, my dear, come here. I think he will not be out of place in a family consultation. Is it not so, Prince? Why don't you speak, cousin?" suddenly shrieked the princess so loud that those in the drawing-room heard her and were startled. "Why do you remain silent when heaven knows who permits herself to interfere, making a scene on the very threshold of a dying man's room? Intriguer," she hissed viciously, and tugged with all her might at the portfolio. But Anna Mikhailovna went forward a step or two to keep her hold on the portfolio, and changed her grip. Prince Vasily rose. "Oh," said he with reproach and surprise, "this is absurd. Come, let go, I tell you." The princess let go. "And you too." But Anna Mikhailovna did not obey him. "Let go, I tell you. I will take the responsibility. I myself will go and ask him. Does that satisfy you?" "But, Prince," said Anna Mikhailovna, "after such a solemn sacrament, allow him a moment's peace. Here, Pierre, tell them your opinion," said she, turning to the young man who, having come quite close, was gazing with astonishment at the angry face of the princess which had lost all dignity, and at the twitching cheeks of Prince Vasily. "Remember that you will answer for the consequences," said Prince Vasily severely. "You don't know what you are doing." "Vile woman," shouted the princess, darting unexpectedly at Anna Mikhailovna and snatching the portfolio from her. Prince Vasily bent his head and spread out his hands. At this moment that terrible door, which Pierre had watched so long and which had always opened so quietly, burst noisily open and banged against the wall, and the second of the three sisters rushed out wringing her hands. "What are you doing?" she cried vehemently. "He is dying and you leave me alone with him." Her sister dropped the portfolio. Anna Mikhailovna, stooping, quickly caught up the object of contention and ran into the bedroom. The eldest princess and Prince Vasily, recovering themselves, followed her. A few minutes later the eldest sister came out with a pale hard face, again biting her underlip. At sight of Pierre her expression showed an irrepressible hatred. "Yes, now you may be glad," said she. "This is what you have been waiting for." And bursting into tears she hid her face in her handkerchief and rushed from the room. Prince Vasily came next. He staggered to the sofa on which Pierre was sitting and dropped onto it, covering his face with his hand. Pierre noticed that he was pale and that his jaw quivered and shook as if in an ague. "Ah, my friend," said he, taking Pierre by the elbow, and there was in his voice a sincerity and weakness Pierre had never observed in it before. "How often we sin, how much we deceive, and all for what? I am near 60, dear friend. I too. All will end in death, all. Death is awful," and he burst into tears. Anna Mikhailovna came out last. She approached Pierre with slow, quiet steps. "Pierre," she said. Pierre gave her an inquiring look. She kissed the young man on his forehead, wetting him with her tears. Then after a pause she said, "He is no more." Pierre looked at her over his spectacles. "Come, I will go with you. Try to weep, nothing gives such relief as tears." She led him into the dark drawing-room and Pierre was glad no one could see his face. Anna Mikhailovna left him, and when she returned he was fast asleep with his head on his arm. In the morning Anna Mikhailovna said to Pierre, "Yes, my dear, this is a great loss for us all, not to speak of you. But God will support you. You are young, and are now, I hope, in command of an immense fortune. The will has not yet been opened. I know you well enough to be sure that this will not turn your head, but it imposes duties on you, and you must be a man." Pierre was silent. "Perhaps later on I may tell you, my dear boy, that if I had not been there, God only knows what would have happened. You know, Uncle promised me only the day before yesterday not to forget Boris. But he had no time. I hope, my dear friend, you will carry out your father's wish?" Pierre understood nothing of all this and, coloring shyly, looked in silence at Princess Anna Mikhailovna. After her talk with Pierre, Anna Mikhailovna returned to the Rostovs and went to bed. On waking in the morning, she told the Rostovs and all her acquaintances the details of Count Bezukhov's death. She said the Count had died as she would herself wish to die, that his end was not only touching but edifying. As to the last meeting between father and son, it was so touching that she could not think of it without tears, and did not know which had behaved better during those awful moments, the father who so remembered everything and everybody at last and had spoken such pathetic words to the son, or Pierre, whom it had been pitiful to see, so stricken was he with grief, though he tried hard to hide it in order not to sadden his dying father. It is painful, but it does one good. It uplifts the soul to see such men as the old Count and his worthy son, said she. Of the behavior of the eldest princess and Prince Vasily she spoke disapprovingly, but in whispers and as a great secret. Chapter 25. At Bald Hills, Prince Nicholas Andreevich Bolkonsky's estate, the arrival of young Prince Andrew and his wife was daily expected, but this expectation did not upset the regular routine of life in the old prince's household. General-in-Chief Prince Nicholas Andreevich, nicknamed in society the King of Prussia, ever since the Emperor Paul had exiled him to his country estate, had lived there continuously with his daughter, Princess Mary, and her companion, Mademoiselle Bourienne. Though in the new reign he was free to return to the capitals, he still continued to live in the country, remarking that anyone who wanted to see him could come the 100 miles from Moscow to Bald Hills, while he himself needed no one and nothing. He used to say that there are only two sources of human vice: idleness and superstition, and only two virtues: activity and intelligence. He himself undertook his daughter's education, and to develop these two cardinal virtues in her gave her lessons in algebra and geometry till she was 20, and arranged her life so that her whole time was occupied. He was himself always occupied, writing his memoirs, solving problems in higher mathematics, turning snuff boxes on a lathe, working in the garden, or superintending the building that was always going on at his estate. As regularity is a prime condition facilitating activity, regularity in his household was carried to the highest point of exactitude. He always came to table under precisely the same conditions, and not only at the same hour but at the same minute. With those about him, from his daughter to his serfs, the prince was sharp and invariably exacting, so that without being a hard-hearted man he inspired such fear and respect as few hard-hearted men would have aroused. Although he was in retirement and had now no influence in political affairs, every high official appointed to the province in which the prince's estate lay considered it his duty to visit him and waited in the lofty antechamber just as the architect, gardener, or Princess Mary did, till the prince appeared punctually to the appointed hour. Everyone sitting in this antechamber experienced the same feeling of respect and even fear when the enormously high study door opened and showed the figure of a rather small old man, with powdered wig, small withered hands, and bushy grey eyebrows which, when he frowned, sometimes hid the gleam of his shrewd, youthfully glittering eyes. On the morning of the day that the young couple were to arrive, Princess Mary entered the antechamber as usual at the time appointed for the morning greeting, crossing herself with trepidation and repeating a silent prayer. Every morning she came in like that, and every morning prayed that the daily interview might pass off well. An old powdered manservant who was sitting in the antechamber rose quietly and said in a whisper, "Please walk in." Through the door came the regular hum of a lathe. The princess timidly opened the door, which moved noiselessly and easily. She paused at the entrance. The prince was working at the lathe and after glancing round continued his work. The enormous study was full of things evidently in constant use. The large table covered with books and plans, the tall glass-fronted bookcases with keys in the locks, the high desk for writing while standing up, on which lay an open exercise book, and the lathe with tools laid ready to hand and shavings scattered around all indicated continuous, varied, and orderly activity. The motion of the small foot shod in a Tartar boot embroidered with silver, and the firm pressure of the lean sinewy hand, showed that the prince still possessed the tenacious endurance and vigor of hardy old age. After a few more turns of the lathe he removed his foot from the pedal, wiped his chisel, dropped it into a leather pouch attached to the lathe, and, approaching the table, summoned his daughter. He never gave his children a blessing, so he simply held out his bristly cheek, as yet unshaven, and, regarding her tenderly and attentively, said severely, "Quite well. All right then, sit down." He took the exercise book containing lessons in geometry written by himself and drew up a chair with his foot. "For tomorrow," said he, quickly finding the page and making a scratch from one paragraph to another with his hard nail. The princess bent over the exercise book on the table. "Wait a bit, here's a letter for you," said the old man suddenly, taking a letter addressed in a woman's hand from a bag hanging above the table, onto which he threw it. At the sight of the letter red patches showed themselves on the princess's face. She took it quickly and bent her head over it. "From Heloise?" asked the prince with a cold smile that showed his still sound, yellowish teeth. "Yes, it's from Julie," replied the princess with a timid glance and a timid smile. "I'll let 2 more letters pass, but the third I'll read," said the prince sternly. "I'm afraid you write much nonsense." "I'll read the third." "Read this if you like, father," said the princess, blushing still more and holding out the letter. "The third, I said the third," cried the prince abruptly, pushing the letter away, and leaning his elbows on the table he drew toward him the exercise book containing geometrical figures. "Well, madam," he began, stooping over the book close to his daughter and placing an arm on the back of the chair on which she sat, so that she felt herself surrounded on all sides by the acrid scent of old age and tobacco, which she had known so long. "Now, madam, these triangles are equal. Please note that the angle ABC." The princess looked in a scared way at her father's eyes glittering close to her. The red patches on her face came and went, and it was plain that she understood nothing and was so frightened that her fear would prevent her understanding any of her father's further explanations, however clear they might be. Whether it was the teacher's fault or the pupil's, this same thing happened every day. The princess's eyes grew dim, she could not see and could not hear anything, but was only conscious of her stern father's withered face close to her, of his breath and the smell of him, and could think only of how to get away quickly to her own room to make out the problem in peace. The old man was beside himself, moved the chair on which he was sitting noisily backward and forward, made efforts to control himself and not become vehement, but almost always did become vehement, scolded, and sometimes flung the exercise book away. The princess gave a wrong answer. "Well now, isn't she a fool?" shouted the prince, pushing the book aside and turning sharply away. but rising immediately, he paced up and down, lightly touched his daughter's hair and sat down again. He drew up his chair, and continued to explain. "This won't do, Princess, it won't do," said he, when Princess Mary, having taken and closed the exercise book with the next day's lesson, was about to leave. "Mathematics are most important, madam. I don't want to have you like our silly ladies. Get used to it and you'll like it," and he patted her cheek. "It will drive all the nonsense out of your head." She turned to go, but he stopped her with a gesture and took an uncut book from the high desk. "Here is some sort of key to the mysteries that your Heloise has sent you. Religious. I don't interfere with anyone's belief. I have looked at it. Take it. Well, now go. Go." He patted her on the shoulder and himself closed the door after her. Princess Mary went back to her room with the sad, scared expression that rarely left her and which made her plain, sickly face yet plainer. She sat down at her writing table, on which stood miniature portraits and which was littered with books and papers. The princess was as untidy as her father was tidy. She put down the geometry book and eagerly broke the seal of her letter. It was from her most intimate friend from childhood, that same Julie Karagina who had been at the Rostovs' name-day party. Julie wrote in French, "Dear and precious friend, how terrible and frightful a thing is separation, though I tell myself that half my life and half my happiness are wrapped up in you, and that in spite of the distance separating us our hearts are united by indissoluble bonds. My heart rebels against fate, and in spite of the pleasures and distractions around me, I cannot overcome a certain secret sorrow that has been in my heart ever since we parted. Why are we not together as we were last summer, in your big study, on the blue sofa, the confidential sofa? Why cannot I now, as 3 months ago, draw fresh moral strength from your look, so gentle, calm, and penetrating, a look I loved so well and seem to see before me as I write?" Having read thus far, Princess Mary sighed and glanced into the mirror which stood on her right. It reflected a weak, ungraceful figure and thin face. Her eyes, always sad, now looked with particular hopelessness at her reflection in the glass. "She flatters me," thought the princess, turning away and continuing to read. But Julie did not flatter her friend. The princess's eyes, large, deep, and luminous, it seemed as if at times there radiated from them shafts of warm light, were so beautiful that very often, in spite of the plainness of her face, they gave her an attraction more powerful than that of beauty. But the princess never saw the beautiful expression of her own eyes, the look they had when she was not thinking of herself. As with everyone, her face assumed a forced, unnatural expression as soon as she looked in a glass. She went on reading. "All Moscow talks of nothing but war. One of my 2 brothers is already abroad, the other is with the Guards, who are starting on their march to the frontier. Our dear Emperor has left Petersburg and it is thought intends to expose his precious person to the chances of war. God grant that the Corsican monster who is destroying the peace of Europe may be overthrown by the angel whom it has pleased the Almighty, in his goodness, to give us as sovereign. To say nothing of my brothers, this war has deprived me of one of the associations nearest my heart. I mean young Nicholas Rostov, who with his enthusiasm could not bear to remain inactive and has left the university to join the army. I will confess to you, dear Mary, that in spite of his extreme youth his departure for the army was a great grief to me. This young man, of whom I spoke to you last summer, is so noble-minded and full of that real youthfulness which one seldom finds nowadays among our old men of 20, and, particularly, he is so frank and has so much heart. He is so pure and poetic that my relations with him, transient as they were, have been one of the sweetest comforts to my poor heart, which has already suffered so much. Some day I will tell you about our parting and all that was said then. That is still too fresh. Ah, dear friend, you are happy not to know these poignant joys and sorrows. You are fortunate, for the latter are generally the stronger. I know very well that Count Nicholas is too young ever to be more to me than a friend, but this sweet friendship, this poetic and pure intimacy, were what my heart needed. But enough of this. The chief news, about which all Moscow gossips, is the death of old Count Bezukhov, and his inheritance. Fancy! The three princesses have received very little, Prince Vasily nothing, and it is Monsieur Pierre who has inherited all the property and has besides been recognized as legitimate, so that he is now Count Bezukhov and possessor of the finest fortune in Russia. It is rumored that Prince Vasily played a very despicable part in this affair and that he returned to Petersburg quite crestfallen. I confess I understand very little about all these matters of wills and inheritance, but I do know that since this young man, whom we all used to know as plain Monsieur Pierre, has become Count Bezukhov and the owner of one of the largest fortunes in Russia, I am much amused to watch the change in the tone and manners of the mammas burdened by marriageable daughters, and of the young ladies themselves, toward him, though, between you and me, he always seemed to me a poor sort of fellow. As for the past 2 years, people have amused themselves by finding husbands for me, most of whom I don't even know. The matchmaking chronicles of Moscow now speak of me as the future Countess Bezukhova. But you will understand that I have no desire for the post. Apropos of marriages, do you know that a while ago that universal Auntie Anna Mikhailovna told me, under the seal of strict secrecy, of a plan of marriage for you. It is neither more nor less than with Prince Vasily's son Anatole, whom they wish to reform by marrying him to someone rich and distinguished, and it is on you that his relations' choice has fallen. I don't know what you will think of it, but I consider it my duty to let you know of it. He is said to be very handsome and a terrible scapegrace. That is all I have been able to find out about him. But enough of gossip. I am at the end of my second sheet of paper, and Mamma has sent for me to go and dine at the Apraxins. Read the mystical book I am sending you. It has an enormous success here. Though there are things in it difficult for the feeble human mind to grasp, it is an admirable book which calms and elevates the soul. Adieu. Give my respects to Monsieur your father and my compliments to Mademoiselle Bourrienne. I embrace you as I love you. Julie. P.S. Let me have news of your brother and his charming little wife. The princess pondered a while with a thoughtful smile, and her luminous eyes lit up so that her face was entirely transformed. Then she suddenly rose and with her heavy tread went up to the table. She took a sheet of paper and her hand moved rapidly over it. This is the reply she wrote, also in French. Dear and precious friend, your letter of the 13th has given me great delight. So you still love me, my romantic Julie? Separation, of which you say so much that is bad, does not seem to have had its usual effect on you. You complain of our separation. What then should I say, if I dared complain, I who am deprived of all who are dear to me? Ah, if we had not religion to console us, life would be very sad. Why do you suppose that I should look severely on your affection for that young man? On such matters I am only severe with myself. I understand such feelings in others, and if never having felt them I cannot approve of them, neither do I condemn them. Only it seems to me that Christian love, love of one's neighbor, love of one's enemy, is worthier, sweeter, and better than the feelings which the beautiful eyes of a young man can inspire in a romantic and loving young girl like yourself. The news of Count Bezukhov's death reached us before your letter, and my father was much affected by it. He says the Count was the last representative but one of the great century, and that it is his own turn now, but that he will do all he can to let his turn come as late as possible. God preserve us from that terrible misfortune. I cannot agree with you about Pierre, whom I knew as a child. He always seemed to me to have an excellent heart, and that is the quality I value most in people. As to his inheritance and the part played by Prince Vasily, it is very sad for both. Ah, my dear friend, our divine Saviour's words, that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God, are terribly true. I pity Prince Vasily, but am still more sorry for Pierre. So young, and burdened with such riches, to what temptations he will be exposed. If I were asked what I desire most on earth, it would be to be poorer than the poorest beggar. 1,000 thanks, dear friend, for the volume you have sent me and which has such success in Moscow. Yet since you tell me that among some good things it contains others which our weak human understanding cannot grasp, it seems to me rather useless to spend time in reading what is unintelligible and can therefore bear no fruit. I never could understand the fondness some people have for confusing their minds by dwelling on mystical books that merely awaken their doubts and excite their imagination, giving them a bent for exaggeration quite contrary to Christian simplicity. Let us rather read the epistles and gospels. Let us not seek to penetrate what mysteries they contain, for how can we, miserable sinners that we are, know the terrible and holy secrets of providence while we remain in this flesh which forms an impenetrable veil between us and the eternal? Let us rather confine ourselves to studying those sublime rules which our divine Saviour has left for our guidance here below. Let us try to conform to them and follow them, and let us be persuaded that the less we let our feeble human minds roam, the better we shall please God, who rejects all knowledge that does not come from him, and the less we seek to fathom what he has been pleased to conceal from us, the sooner will he vouchsafe its revelation to us through his divine Spirit. My father has not spoken to me of a suitor, but has only told me that he has received a letter and is expecting a visit from Prince Vasily. In regard to this project of marriage for me, I will tell you, dear sweet friend, that I look on marriage as a divine institution to which we must conform. However painful it may be to me, should the Almighty lay the duties of wife and mother upon me, I shall try to perform them as faithfully as I can, without disquieting myself by examining my feelings toward him whom he may give me for husband. I have had a letter from my brother, who announces his speedy arrival at Bald Hills with his wife. This pleasure will be but a brief one, however, for he will leave us again to take part in this unhappy war into which we have been drawn, God knows how or why. Not only where you are, at the heart of affairs and of the world, is the talk all of war, even here amid fieldwork and the calm of nature, which townsfolk consider characteristic of the country, rumors of war are heard and painfully felt. My father talks of nothing but marches and countermarches, things of which I understand nothing, and the day before yesterday during my daily walk through the village I witnessed a heartrending scene. It was a convoy of conscripts enrolled from our people and starting to join the army. You should have seen the state of the mothers, wives, and children of the men who were going, and should have heard the sobs. It seems as though mankind has forgotten the laws of its divine Saviour, who preached love and forgiveness of injuries, and that men attribute the greatest merit to skill in killing one another. Adieu, dear and kind friend. May our divine Saviour and his most holy Mother keep you in their holy and all-powerful care. Mary. Ah, You are sending off a letter, Princess? I have already dispatched mine. I have written to my poor mother, said the smiling Mademoiselle Bourrienne rapidly, in her pleasant mellow tones and with guttural rs. She brought into Princess Mary's strenuous, mournful, and gloomy world a quite different atmosphere, careless, light-hearted, and self-satisfied. Princess, I must warn you, she added, lowering her voice and evidently listening to herself with pleasure, and speaking with exaggerated grassiment, the prince has been scolding Michael Ivanovich. He is in a very bad humor, very morose. Be prepared. Ah, dear friend, replied Princess Mary, I have asked you never to warn me of the humor my father is in. I do not allow myself to judge him and would not have others do so. The princess glanced at her watch and, seeing that she was 5 minutes late in starting her practice on the clavichord, went into the sitting room with a look of alarm. Between 12 and 2 o'clock, as the day was mapped out, the prince rested and the princess played the clavichord. Chapter 26. The grey-haired valet was sitting drowsily listening to the snoring of the prince, who was in his large study. From the far side of the house through the closed doors came the sound of difficult passages, 20 times repeated, of a sonata by Dussek. Just then a closed carriage and another with a hood drove up to the porch. Prince Andrew got out of the carriage, helped his little wife to alight, and let her pass into the house before him. Old Tikhon, wearing a wig, put his head out of the door of the antechamber, reported in a whisper that the prince was sleeping, and hastily closed the door. Tikhon knew that neither the son's arrival nor any other unusual event must be allowed to disturb the appointed order of the day. Prince Andrew apparently knew this as well as Tikhon. He looked at his watch as if to ascertain whether his father's habits had changed since he was at home last, and, having assured himself that they had not, he turned to his wife. He will get up in 20 minutes. Let us go across to Mary's room, he said. The little princess had grown stouter during this time, but her eyes and her short, downy, smiling lip lifted when she began to speak just as merrily and prettily as ever. Why, this is a palace, she said to her husband, looking around with the expression with which people compliment their host at a ball. Let's come, quick, quick. And with a glance round, she smiled at Tikhon, at her husband, and at the footman who accompanied them. Is that Mary practicing? Let's go quietly and take her by surprise. Prince Andrew followed her with a courteous but sad expression. You've grown older, Tikhon, he said in passing to the old man, who kissed his hand. Before they reached the room from which the sounds of the clavichord came, the pretty, fair-haired Frenchwoman, Mademoiselle Bourrienne, rushed out apparently beside herself with delight. Ah! What joy for the princess, exclaimed she, at last. I must let her know. No, no, please not. You are Mademoiselle Bourrienne, said the little princess, kissing her. I know you already through my sister-in-law's friendship for you. She was not expecting us. They went up to the door of the sitting room from which came the sound of the oft-repeated passage of the sonata. Prince Andrew stopped and made a grimace, as if expecting something unpleasant. The little princess entered the room. The passage broke off in the middle, a cry was heard, then Princess Mary's heavy tread and the sound of kissing. When Prince Andrew went in, the two princesses, who had only met once before for a short time at his wedding, were in each other's arms, warmly pressing their lips to whatever place they happened to touch. Mademoiselle Bourrienne stood near them, pressing her hand to her heart, with a beatific smile and obviously equally ready to cry or to laugh. Prince Andrew shrugged his shoulders and frowned, as lovers of music do when they hear a false note. The two women let go of one another, and then, as if afraid of being too late, seized each other's hands, kissing them and pulling them away, and again began kissing each other on the face, and then to Prince Andrew's surprise both began to cry and kissed again. Mademoiselle Bourrienne also began to cry. Prince Andrew evidently felt ill at ease, but to the two women it seemed quite natural that they should cry, and apparently it never entered their heads that it could have been otherwise at this meeting. "Ah, my dear. Ah, Mary," they suddenly exclaimed, and then laughed. "I dreamed last night. You were not expecting us. Ah, Mary, you have got thinner, and you have grown stouter." "I knew the princess at once," put in Mademoiselle Bourrienne. "And I had no idea," exclaimed Princess Mary. "Ah, Andrew, I did not see you." Prince Andrew and his sister, hand in hand, kissed one another, and he told her she was still the same crybaby as ever. Princess Mary had turned toward her brother, and through her tears the loving, warm, gentle look of her large luminous eyes, very beautiful at that moment, rested on Prince Andrew's face. The little princess talked incessantly, her short, downy upper lip continually and rapidly touching her rosy nether lip when necessary and drawing up again next moment when her face broke into a smile of glittering teeth and sparkling eyes. She told of an accident they had had on the Spassky Hill which might have been serious for her in her condition, and immediately after that informed them that she had left all her clothes in Petersburg and that heaven knew what she would have to dress in here, and that Andrew had quite changed, and that Kitty Odintsova had married an old man, and that there was a suitor for Mary, a real one, but that they would talk of that later. Princess Mary was still looking silently at her brother, and her beautiful eyes were full of love and sadness. It was plain that she was following a train of thought independent of her sister-in-law's words. In the midst of a description of the last Petersburg fete, she addressed her brother. "So you are really going to the war, Andrew," she said, sighing. Lee sighed too. "Yes, and even tomorrow," replied her brother. "He is leaving me here, God knows why, when he might have had promotion." Princess Mary did not listen to the end, but continuing her train of thought turned to her sister-in-law with a tender glance at her figure. "Is it certain?" she said. The face of the little princess changed. She sighed and said, "Yes, quite certain." "Ah, it is very dreadful." Her lip descended. She brought her face close to her sister-in-law's and unexpectedly again began to cry. "She needs rest," said Prince Andrew with a frown. "Don't you, Lise? Take her to your room and I'll go to father." "How is he?" "Just the same." "Yes, just the same. Though I don't know what your opinion will be," answered the princess joyfully. "And are the hours the same? And the walks in the avenues? And the lathe?" asked Prince Andrew with a scarcely perceptible smile which showed that, in spite of all his love and respect for his father, he was aware of his weaknesses. "The hours are the same, and the lathe, and also the mathematics and my geometry lessons," said Princess Mary gleefully, as if her lessons in geometry were among the greatest delights of her life. When the 20 minutes had elapsed and the time had come for the old prince to get up, Tikhon came to call the young prince to his father. The old man made a departure from his usual routine in honor of his son's arrival. He gave orders to admit him to his apartments while he dressed for dinner. The old prince always dressed in old-fashioned style, wearing an antique coat and powdered hair, and when Prince Andrew entered his father's dressing room, not with the contemptuous look and manner he wore in drawing rooms, but with the animated face with which he talked to Pierre, the old man was sitting on a large leather-covered chair, wrapped in a powdering mantle, entrusting his head to Tikhon. "Ah, here's the warrior. Wants to vanquish Bonaparte, said the old man, shaking his powdered head as much as the tail, which Tychon was holding fast to Platt, would allow. You at least must tackle him properly, or else if he goes on like this he'll soon have us, too, for his subject. How are you? And he held out his cheek. The old man was in a good temper after his nap before dinner. He used to say that a nap after dinner was silver, before dinner, golden. He cast happy, sidelong glances at his son from under his thick, bushy eyebrows. Prince Andrew went up and kissed his father on the spot indicated to him. He made no reply on his father's favorite topic, making fun of the military men of the day, and more particularly of Bonaparte. Yes, father, I have come to you and brought my wife who is pregnant, said Prince Andrew, following every movement of his father's face with an eager and respectful look. How is your health? Only fools and rakes fall ill, my boy. You know me, I am busy from morning till night and abstemious, so of course I am well. Thank God, said his son smiling. God has nothing to do with it. Well, go on, he continued, returning to his hobby. Tell me how the Germans have taught you to fight Bonaparte by this new science you call strategy. Prince Andrew smiled. Give me time to collect my wits, father, said he, with a smile that showed that his father's foibles did not prevent his son from loving and honoring him. Why, I have not yet had time to settle down. Nonsense, nonsense, cried the old man, shaking his pigtail to see whether it was firmly plaited, and grasping his by the hand. The house for your wife is ready. Princess Mary will take her there and show her over, and they'll talk 19 to the dozen. That's their woman's way. I am glad to have her. Sit down and talk. About Michelson's army I understand, Tolstoy's too, a simultaneous expedition. But what's the Southern Army to do? Prussia is neutral. I know that. What about Austria? Said he, rising from his chair and pacing up and down the room, followed by Tychon, who ran after him, handing him different articles of clothing. What of Sweden? How will they cross Pomerania? Prince Andrew, seeing that his father insisted, began at first reluctantly, but gradually with more and more animation, and from habit changing unconsciously from Russian to French as he went on, to explain the plan of operation for the coming campaign. He explained how an army, 90,000 strong, was to threaten Prussia so as to bring her out of her neutrality and draw her into the war, how part of that army was to join some Swedish forces at Stralsund, how 220,000 Austrians, with 100,000 Russians, were to operate in Italy and on the Rhine, how 50,000 Russians and as many English were to land at Naples, and how a total force of 500,000 men was to attack the French from different sides. The old prince did not evince the least interest during this explanation, but as if he were not listening to it, continued to dress while walking about, and 3 times unexpectedly interrupted. Once he stopped it by shouting, "The white one, the white one." This meant that Tychon was not handing him the waistcoat he wanted. Another time he interrupted, saying, "And will she soon be confined?" and shaking his head reproachfully said, "That's bad. Go on, go on." The third interruption came when Prince Andrew was finishing his description. The old man began to sing, in the cracked voice of old age, "Malbrook essien veinga. Diu sate quond reviendra. Asterisk. Asterisk Marlborough is going to the wars. God knows when he'll return." His son only smiled. "I don't say it's a plan I approve of," said the son. "I am only telling you what it is. Napoleon has also formed his plan by now, not worse than this one." "Well, you've told me nothing new," and the old man repeated, meditatively and rapidly, "Dayu sate quond reviendra." Go to the dining room. Chapter 27. At the appointed hour the prince, powdered and shaven, entered the dining room where his daughter-in-law, Princess Mary, and Mademoiselle Bourrienne were already awaiting him together with his architect, who by a strange caprice of his employers was admitted to table, though the position of that insignificant individual was such as could certainly not have caused him to expect that honor. The prince, who generally kept very strictly to social distinctions and rarely admitted even important government officials to his table, had unexpectedly selected Michael Ivanovich, who always went into a corner to blow his nose on his checked handkerchief, to illustrate the theory that all men are equals, and had more than once impressed on his daughter that Michael Ivanovich was not a whit worse than you or I. At dinner the prince usually spoke to the taciturn Michael Ivanovich more often than to anyone else. In the dining room, which like all the rooms in the house was exceedingly lofty, the members of the household and the footman, one behind each chair, stood waiting for the prince to enter. The head butler, napkin on arm, was scanning the setting of the table, making signs to the footman, and anxiously glancing from the clock to the door by which the prince was to enter. Prince Andrew was looking at a large gilt frame, new to him, containing the genealogical tree of the Princes Bolkonsky, opposite which hung another such frame with a badly painted portrait, evidently by the hand of the artist belonging to the estate, of a ruling prince, in a crown, an alleged descendant of Rurik and ancestor of the Bolkonskis. Prince Andrew, looking again at that genealogical tree, shook his head, laughing as a man laughs who looks at a portrait so characteristic of the original as to be amusing. "How thoroughly like him that is," he said to Princess Mary, who had come up to him. Princess Mary looked at her brother in surprise. She did not understand what he was laughing at. Everything her father did inspired her with reverence and was beyond question. "Everyone has his Achilles heel," continued Prince Andrew. "Fancy, with his powerful mind, indulging in such nonsense." Princess Mary could not understand the boldness of her brother's criticism and was about to reply, when the expected footsteps were heard coming from the study. The prince walked in quickly and jauntily as was his wont, as if intentionally contrasting the briskness of his manners with the strict formality of his house. At that moment the great clock struck 2 and another with a shrill tone joined in from the drawing-room. The prince stood still, his lively glittering eyes from under their thick, bushy eyebrows sternly scanned all present and rested on the little princess. She felt, as courtiers do when the Tsar enters, the sensation of fear and respect which the old man inspired in all around him. He stroked her hair and then patted her awkwardly on the back of her neck. "I'm glad to see you," he said, looking attentively into her eyes, and then quickly went to his place and sat down. Sit down, Michael Ivanovich." He indicated a place beside him to his daughter-in-law. A footman moved the chair for her. Ho, said the old man, casting his eyes on her rounded figure. "You've been in a hurry. That's bad." He laughed in his usual dry, cold, unpleasant way, with his lips only and not with his eyes. "You must walk as much as possible, he said. The little princess did not, or did not wish to, hear his words. She was silent and seemed confused. The prince asked her about her father, and she began to smile and talk. He asked about mutual acquaintances, and she became still more animated and chatted away, giving him greetings from various people and retelling the town gossip. "Countess Apraxina, poor thing, has lost her husband and she has cried her eyes out," she said, growing more and more lively. As she became animated, the prince looked at her more and more sternly, and suddenly, as if he had studied her sufficiently and had formed a definite idea of her, he turned away and addressed Michael Ivanovich. "Well, Michael Ivanovich, our Bonaparte will be having a bad time of it. Prince Andrew," he always spoke thus of his son, "has been telling me what forces are being collected against him, while you and I never thought much of him." Michael Ivanovich did not at all know when you and I had said such things about Bonaparte, but understanding that he was wanted as a peg on which to hang the prince's favorite topic, he looked inquiringly at the young prince, wondering what would follow. "He is a great tactician," said the prince to his son, pointing to the architect. And the conversation again turned on the war, on Bonaparte, and the generals and statesmen of the day. The old prince seemed convinced not only that all the men of the day were mere babies who did not know the ABC of war or of politics, and that Bonaparte was an insignificant little Frenchie, successful only because there were no longer any Potemkins or Suvorovs left to oppose him, but he was also convinced that there were no political difficulties in Europe and no real war, but only a sort of puppet show at which the men of the day were playing, pretending to do something real. Prince Andrew gaily bore with his father's ridicule of the new men, and drew him on and listened to him with evident pleasure. "The past always seems good," said he, "but did not Suvorov himself fall into a trap Moreau set him, and from which he did not know how to escape?" "Who told you that?" "Who?" cried the prince. "Suvorov." And he jerked away his plate, which Tikhon briskly caught. "Suvorov. Consider, Prince Andrew. 2. Frederick and Suvorov, Moreau. Moreau would have been a prisoner if Suvorov had had a free hand, but he had the Hofskrieg's worst Schnapsrath on his hands. It would have puzzled the devil himself. When you get there you'll find out what those Hofskrieg's worst wraths are. Suvorov couldn't manage them, so what chance has Michael Kutuzov? No, my dear boy," he continued, "you and your generals won't get on against Bonaparte. You'll have to call in the French, so that birds of a feather may fight together. The German, Parlin, has been sent to New York in America, to fetch the Frenchman, Moreau," he said, alluding to the invitation made that year to Moreau to enter the Russian service. "Wonderful. Were the Potemkins, Suvorovs, and Orloffs Germans? No, lad, either you fellows have all lost your wits, or I have outlived mine. May God help you, but we'll see what will happen. Bonaparte has become a great commander among them. Tem. I don't at all say that all the plans are good," said Prince Andrew. "I am only surprised at your opinion of Bonaparte. You may laugh as much as you like, but all the same Bonaparte is a great general." "Michael Ivanovich," cried the old prince to the architect who, busy with his roast meat, hoped he had been forgotten, "didn't I tell you Bonaparte was a great tactician? Here, he says the same thing." "To be sure, Your Excellency," replied the architect. The prince again laughed his frigid laugh. "Bonaparte was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He has got splendid soldiers. Besides, he began by attacking Germans. And only idlers have failed to beat the Germans. Since the world began, everybody has beaten the Germans. They beat no one except one another. He made his reputation fighting them." And the prince began explaining all the blunders which, according to him, Bonaparte had made in his campaigns and even in politics. His son made no rejoinder, but it was evident that whatever arguments were presented, he was as little able as his father to change his opinion. He listened, refraining from a reply, and involuntarily wondered how this old man, living alone in the country for so many years, Could no one discuss so minutely and acutely all the recent European military and political events? You think I'm an old man and don't understand the present state of affairs, concluded his father. But it troubles me. I don't sleep at night. Come now, where has this great commander of yours shown his skill? He concluded. That would take too long to tell, answered the son. Well, then go off to your Bonaparte. Mademoiselle Bourrienne, here's another admirer of that powder-monkey emperor of yours, he exclaimed in excellent French. You know, Prince, I am not a Bonapartist. Dieu sait quand reviendra, hummed the prince out of tune and, with a laugh still more so, he quitted the table. The little princess during the whole discussion and the rest of the dinner sat silent, glancing with a frightened look now at her father-in-law and now at Princess Mary. When they left the table she took her sister-in-law's arm and drew her into another room. What a clever man your father is, said she. Perhaps that is why I am afraid of him. Oh, he is so kind, answered Princess Mary. Chapter 28. Prince Andrew was to leave next evening. The old prince, not altering his routine, retired as usual after dinner. The little princess was in her sister-in-law's room. Prince Andrew, in a travelling coat without epaulets, had been packing with his valet in the rooms assigned to him. After inspecting the carriage himself and seeing the trunks put in, he ordered the horses to be harnessed. Only those things he always kept with him remained in his room: a small box, a large canteen fitted with silver plate, 2 Turkish pistols and a saber, a present from his father who had brought it from the siege of Ochakov. All these travelling effects of Prince Andrew's were in very good order, new, clean, and in cloth covers carefully tied with tapes. When starting on a journey or changing their mode of life, men capable of reflection are generally in a serious frame of mind. At such moments one reviews the past and plans for the future. Prince Andrew's face looked very thoughtful and tender. With his hands behind him he paced briskly from corner to corner of the room, looking straight before him and thoughtfully shaking his head. Did he fear going to the war, or was he sad at leaving his wife? Perhaps both, but evidently he did not wish to be seen in that mood, for hearing footsteps in the passage he hurriedly unclasped his hands, stopped at a table as if tying the cover of the small box, and assumed his usual tranquil and impenetrable expression. It was the heavy tread of Princess Mary that he heard. "I hear you have given orders to harness," she cried, panting. She had apparently been running, "and I did so wish to have another talk with you alone. God knows how long we may again be parted. You are not angry with me for coming? You have changed so, Andrusha," she added, as if to explain such a question. She smiled as she uttered his pet name, Andrusha. It was obviously strange to her to think that this stern, handsome man should be Andrusha, the slender, mischievous boy who had been her playfellow in childhood. "And where is Lise?" he asked, answering her question only by a smile. "She was so tired that she has fallen asleep on the sofa in my room." "Oh, Andrew, what a treasure of a wife you have," said she, sitting down on the sofa, facing her brother. "She is quite a child, such a dear, merry child. I have grown so fond of her." Prince Andrew was silent, but the princess noticed the ironical and contemptuous look that showed itself on his face. One must be indulgent to little weaknesses. Who is free from them, Andrew? Don't forget that she has grown up and been educated in society, and so her position now is not a rosy one. We should enter into everyone's situation. Tout comprendre, c'est tout pardonner. Think what it must be for her, poor thing, after what she has been used to, To be parted from her husband and be left alone in the country, in her condition. It's very hard. To understand all is to forgive all. Prince Andrew smiled as he looked at his sister, as we smile at those we think we thoroughly understand. You live in the country and don't think the life terrible, he replied. That's different. Why speak of me? I don't want any other life, and can't, for I know no other. But think, Andrew, for a young society woman to be buried in the country during the best years of her life, all alone, for Papa is always busy, and well, you know what poor resources I have for entertaining a woman used to the best society. There is only Mademoiselle Bourrienne. I don't like your Mademoiselle Bourrienne at all, said Prince Andrew. No. She is very nice and kind and, above all, she's much to be pitied. She has no one. To tell the truth, I don't need her, and she's even in my way. You know I always was a savage, and now am even more so. I like being alone. Father likes her very much. She and Michael Ivanovich are the two people to whom he is always gentle and kind, because he has been a benefactor to them both. As Sterne says, we don't love people so much for the good they have done us, as for the good we have done them. Father took her when she was homeless after losing her own father. She is very good-natured, and my father likes her way of reading. She reads to him in the evenings and reads splendidly. To be quite frank, Mary, I expect Father's character sometimes makes things trying for you, doesn't it? Prince Andrew asked suddenly. Princess Mary was first surprised and then aghast at this question. For me. Trying for me, said she. He always was rather harsh, and now I should think he's getting very trying, said Prince Andrew, apparently speaking lightly of their father in order to puzzle or test his sister. You are good in every way, Andrew, but you have a kind of intellectual pride, said the princess, following the train of her own thoughts rather than the trend of the conversation, and that's a great sin. How can one judge Father? But even if one might, what feeling except veneration could such a man as my father evoke? And I am so contented and happy with him. I only wish you were all as happy as I am. Her brother shook his head incredulously. The only thing that is hard for me, I will tell you the truth, Andrew, is Father's way of treating religious subjects. I don't understand how a man of his immense intellect can fail to see what is as clear as day, and can go so far astray. That is the only thing that makes me unhappy. But even in this I can see lately a shade of improvement. His satire has been less bitter of late, and there was a monk he received and had a long talk with. Ah, my dear, I am afraid you and your monk are wasting your powder, said Prince Andrew banteringly yet tenderly. Ah, mon ami, I only pray, and hope that God will hear me. Andrew, she said timidly after a moment's silence, I have a great favor to ask of you. What is it, dear? No, promise that you will not refuse. It will give you no trouble and is nothing unworthy of you, but it will comfort me. Promise, Andrusha, said she, putting her hand in her reticule but not yet taking out what she was holding inside it, as if what she held were the subject of her request and must not be shown before the request was granted. She looked timidly at her brother. Even if it were a great deal of trouble, answered Prince Andrew, as if guessing what it was about. Think what you please. I know you are just like Father. Think as you please, but do this for my sake. Please do. Father's father, our grandfather, wore it in all his wars. She still did not take out what she was holding in her reticule. So you promise? Of course. What is it? Andrew, I bless you with this icon, and you must promise me you will never take it off. Do you promise? If it does not weigh 100 weight and won't break my neck. To please you, said Prince Andrew. But immediately, noticing the pained expression his joke had brought to his sister's face, he repented and added, I am glad, really, dear, I am very glad. Against your will he will save and have mercy on you and bring you to himself, for in him alone is truth and peace, said she in a voice trembling with emotion, solemnly holding up in both hands before her brother a small, oval, antique, dark-faced icon of the Saviour in a gold setting, on a finely wrought silver chain. She crossed herself, kissed the icon, and handed it to Andrew. Please, Andrew, for my sake. Rays of gentle light shone from her large, timid eyes. Those eyes lit up the whole of her thin, sickly face and made it beautiful. Her brother would have taken the icon, but she stopped him. Andrew understood, crossed himself and kissed the icon. There was a look of tenderness, for he was touched, but also a gleam of irony on his face. Thank you, my dear. She kissed him on the forehead and sat down again on the sofa. They were silent for a while. As I was saying to you, Andrew, be kind and generous as you always used to be. Don't judge Lise harshly, she began. She is so sweet, so good-natured, and her position now is a very hard one. I do not think I have complained of my wife to you, Moshe, or blamed her. Why do you say all this to me? Red patches appeared on Princess Mary's face, and she was silent as if she felt guilty. I have said nothing to you, but you have already been talked to. And I am sorry for that, he went on. The patches grew deeper on her forehead, neck, and cheeks. She tried to say something but could not. Her brother had guessed right. The little princess had been crying after dinner and had spoken of her forebodings about her confinement, and how she dreaded it, and had complained of her fate, her father-in-law, and her husband. After crying she had fallen asleep. Prince Andrew felt sorry for his sister. Know this, Moshe, I can't reproach, have not reproached, and never shall reproach my wife with anything, and I cannot reproach myself with anything in regard to her, and that always will be so in whatever circumstances I may be placed. But if you want to know the truth, if you want to know whether I am happy, no. Is she happy? No. But why this is so I don't know. As he said this he rose, went to his sister, and, stooping, kissed her forehead. His fine eyes lit up with a thoughtful, kindly, and unaccustomed brightness, but he was looking not at his sister but over her head toward the darkness of the open doorway. Let us go to her. I must say goodbye. Or, go and wake and I'll come in a moment. Petrushka, he called to his valet. Come here, take these away. Put this on the seat and this to the right. Princess Mary rose and moved to the door, then stopped and said, Andrew, if you had faith you would have turned to God and asked him to give you the love you do not feel, and your prayer would have been answered. Well, maybe, said Prince Andrew. Go, Moshe. I'll come immediately. On the way to his sister's room, in the passage which connected one wing with the other, Prince Andrew met Mademoiselle Bourrienne smiling sweetly. It was the third time that day that, with an ecstatic and artless smile, she had met him in secluded passages. Oh, I thought you were in your room, she said, for some reason blushing and dropping her eyes. Prince Andrew looked sternly at her and an expression of anger suddenly came over his face. He said nothing to her but looked at her forehead and hair, without looking at her eyes, with such contempt that the Frenchwoman blushed and went away without a word. When he reached his sister's room his wife was already awake and her merry voice, hurrying one word after another, came through the open door. She was speaking as usual in French, and as if after long self-restraint she wished to make up for lost time. No, but imagine the old Countess Zubova, with false curls and her mouth full of false teeth, as if she were trying to cheat old age. Ha, ha, ha. Mary. This very sentence about Countess Zubova and this same laugh Prince Andrew had already heard from his wife in the presence of others some 5 times. He entered the room softly. The little princess, plump and rosy, was sitting in an easy chair with her work in her hands, talking incessantly, repeating Petersburg reminiscences and even phrases. Prince Andrew came up, stroked her hair, and asked if she felt rested after their journey. She answered him and continued her chatter. The coach with 6 horses was waiting at the porch. It was an autumn night, so dark that the coachman could not see the carriage pole. Servants with lanterns were bustling about in the porch. The immense house was brilliant with lights shining through its lofty windows. The domestic serfs were crowding in the hall, waiting to bid goodbye to the young prince. The members of the household were all gathered in the reception hall: Michael Ivanovich, Mademoiselle Bourian, Princess Mary, and the little princess. Prince Andrew had been called to his father's study as the latter wished to say goodbye to him alone. All were waiting for them to come out. When Prince Andrew entered the study, the old man in his old-age spectacles and white dressing gown, in which he received no one but his son, sat at the table writing. He glanced round. Going? And he went on writing. I've come to say goodbye. Kiss me here, and he touched his cheek. Thanks, thanks. What do you thank me for? For not dilly-dallying and not hanging to a woman's apron strings. The service before everything. Thanks, thanks. And he went on writing, so that his quill spluttered and squeaked. If you have anything to say, say it. These 2 things can be done together, he added. About my wife. I am ashamed as it is to leave her on your hands. Why talk nonsense? Say what you want. When her confinement is due, send to Moscow for an akusha. Let him be here. The old prince stopped writing and, as if not understanding, fixed his stern eyes on his son. I know that no one can help if nature does not do her work, said Prince Andrew, evidently confused. I know that out of 1,000,000 cases only one goes wrong, but it is her fancy and mine. They have been telling her things. She has had a dream and is frightened. Chem. Muttered the old prince to himself, finishing what he was writing. I'll do it. He signed with a flourish and suddenly turning to his son began to laugh. It's a bad business, eh? What is bad, father? The wife, said the old prince, briefly and significantly. I don't understand, said Prince Andrew. No, it can't be helped, lad, said the prince. They're all like that. One can't unmarry. Don't be afraid, I won't tell anyone, but you know it yourself. He seized his son by the hand with small bony fingers, shook it, looked straight into his son's face with keen eyes which seemed to see through him, and again laughed his frigid laugh. The son sighed, thus admitting that his father had understood him. The old man continued to fold and seal his letter, snatching up and throwing down the wax, the seal, and the paper, with his accustomed rapidity. What's to be done? She's pretty. I will do everything. Make your mind easy, said he in abrupt sentences while sealing his letter. Andrew did not speak. He was both pleased and displeased that his father understood him. The old man got up and gave the letter to his son. Listen, said he, don't worry about your wife. What can be done shall be. Now listen. Give this letter to Michael Ilarianovich. I have written that he should make use of you in proper places and not keep you long as an adjutant, a bad position. Tell him I remember and like him. Write and tell me how he receives you. If he is all right, serve him. Nicholas Bolkonsky's son need not serve under anyone if he is in disfavor. Now come here. Kutuzov. He spoke so rapidly that he did not finish half his words, but his son was accustomed to understand him. He led him to the desk, raised the lid, drew out a drawer, and took out an exercise book filled with his bold, tall, close handwriting. I shall probably die before you. So remember, these are my memoirs. Hand them to the Emperor after my death. Now here is a Lombard bond and a letter. It is a premium for the man who writes a history of Suvorov's wars. Send it to the Academy. Here are some jottings for you to read when I am gone. You will find them useful. Andrew did not tell his father that he would no doubt live a long time yet. He felt that he must not say it. I will do it all, father, he said. Well, now, goodbye. He gave his son his hand to kiss, and embraced him. Remember this, Prince Andrew, if they kill you it will hurt me, your old father. He paused unexpectedly, and then in a querulous voice suddenly shrieked, but if I hear that you have not behaved like a son of Nicholas Bolkonsky, I shall be ashamed. You need not have said that to me, father, said the son with a smile. The old man was silent. I also wanted to ask you, continued Prince Andrew, if I'm killed and if I have a son, do not let him be taken away from you, as I said yesterday, let him grow up with you. Please. Not let the wife have him, said the old man, and laughed. They stood silent, facing one another. The old man's sharp eyes were fixed straight on his son's. Something twitched in the lower part of the old prince's face. We've said goodbye. Go, he suddenly shouted in a loud, angry voice, opening his door. What is it? What? Asked both princesses when they saw for a moment at the door Prince Andrew and the figure of the old man in a white dressing gown, spectacled and wigless, shouting in an angry voice. Prince Andrew sighed and made no reply. Well, he said, turning to his wife. And this well sounded coldly ironic, as if he were saying, now go through your performance. Andrew, already, said the little princess, turning pale and looking with dismay at her husband. He embraced her. She screamed and fell unconscious on his shoulder. He cautiously released the shoulder she leaned on, looked into her face, and carefully placed her in an easy chair. Adieu, Mary, said he gently to his sister, taking her by the hand and kissing her, and then he left the room with rapid steps. The little princess lay in the armchair, Mademoiselle Bourrienne chafing her temples. Princess Mary, supporting her sister-in-law, still looked with her beautiful eyes full of tears at the door through which Prince Andrew had gone and made the sign of the cross in his direction. From the study, like pistol shots, came the frequent sound of the old man angrily blowing his nose. Hardly had Prince Andrew gone when the study door opened quickly and the stern figure of the old man in the white dressing gown looked out. Gone. That's all right, said he, and looking angrily at the unconscious little princess, he shook his head reprovingly and slammed the door.